Chargen. Since when did ROB offer character generation? The disembodied soul in the middle of an endless void contemplated its options. It didn't know how it got here, or where here was, or if it had agreed to this or was kidnapped directly by Mr. ROB, Truckkuin, or similar. Could tell it was somewhat diminished. Had it died? It had a rather full life of memories, including reading various stories involving similar situations to what it found itself in online. Still, it turned blank if you asked what its name was or even what it looked like in the mirror, and interpersonal memories were a bit spotty. It might have spent some time in a philosophical introspection on the nature of life. Was it alive? However, what it had just done without thinking reassured it. You see, nothing could be this stupid and not be alive. You see, it had a deeply ingrained personality with its own preferences and likes, and it was coming to the realization that these likes were going to kill it. It just knew it. It was, even now, still looking at the locked-in selections with something akin to shock. It had made the selections in a haze, almost on autopilot, and locked them in before it could stop itself. If given an option to trade increased risk, especially if it was temporary, for a long-term payout, it had selected it. It had often taken such choices as a matter of course when playing role-playing games or roguelike games in its past life, but now found itself wondering if it was insane. Asterisk world selection restrictions. Scientific or pseudoscientific only, plus 25 points. Asterisk world selection restrictions. Hide random result. Surprise me. Plus 15 points. Asterisk world. Randomize. Plus 50 points. Binning. Select. Asterisk world is redacted. Asterisk avatar selection. Conventionally attractive subset. Minus 20 points. Asterisk avatar selection. Randomize appearance. Plus 30 points. Asterisk avatar selection. Randomize biography. Skills. Plus 75 points. Asterisk bonus. Random avatar will be selected from any open world, not just selected world. Asterisk bonus. You have greater than 130 points to spend. Avatar biographies upgraded 0.5 to 1.0 tiers. Binning. It sat there staring at the stupidly selected 15 bonus points while the blue-boxed interface that reminded him of an early Final Fantasy game animated a spinning glyph that was slowing down. Those 15 points granted from hiding the previously randomized world weren't worth it. That wasn't even that many points. Yet it impacted the rest of the selections so much. When it tried to select an avatar's biography, everything was redacted, except the point costs associated with each selection. The user interface should have been given a brief précis on each option, which would have included any skills and knowledge the individual biography would impart into its mind when selected. It wasn't sure how it knew this, but it did. All of them looked worse than what you get if you requested FOIA documents from the CIA. In a peek, it had mashed the use all available points and randomize option with its mind because was that really any different from what it would have been doing by selecting a completely redacted biography? It didn't even really understand what the tiers were, but it supposed it intellectually appreciated the bonus. A randomized character generated would not be such a big deal on certain worlds, but it could be instant death on others. A Special Forces soldier background would be a bit of a curiosity in a Star Trek universe, but a Star Trek science officer would be meat if dropped anywhere near the plot of Halo, for example. The spirit should be panicking more than it was. It did not understand why it was not. Select. Asterisk avatar appearance. Select. Asterisk avatar biography. Transhuman researcher. Select. Asterisk avatar tier. Superior. Asterisk avatar perks. Genius, prodigy, driven. Asterisk avatar flaws. Eccentric, single-minded, situationally morally inflexible, transhumanism and non-human/AI rights. Asterisk avatar low doubt. Standard. Asterisk avatar specialties. Medicine/cybernetics/genetics/virology. Asterisk data download in 3, 2, 1. The spirit knew why it wasn't panicking, even if the random selection was perhaps one of the worst options if it ended up in a death world. It wasn't panicking because panic was a function primarily of biology. Specifically, it involved an autofacilitatory feedback loop involving adrenaline and other neurotransmitters. It wasn't, then, surprising why a disembodied spirit could, at most, feel very concerned with its lot. Ideas about how one would mimic this effect in a baseline human flooded the spirit's mind for a moment. The spirit's new knowledge found the very notion of panic deeply detestable, as perhaps the worst failing of an already profoundly fallible bag of meat and water. The option it seemed to want to push the most was, replace brain entirely with carbon hypermatrix optical quantum computer running our neural network in an emulation, so it was going to be that kind of transhumanist background. It would have helped the spirit if it knew its selected avatar's source material but did not recognize it. Its new memories described a human race of hundreds of billions that had colonized the entire solar system but had not yet reached other star systems. It was an era of space exploration that was necessary when the Earth was rendered inhabitable through aggressive bioweapons and artificially intelligent killbots. And aggressively intelligent bioweapons. Terraforming Venus was considered cheaper and safer than trying to clean up Earth. It spent a few moments trying to reconcile its earliest memories with the knowledge of the Avatar. Its new memories suggested that a person, an ego, was nothing more and nothing less than the sum of all its experiences and knowledge. So it spent some time compartmentalizing and focusing on its memories, trying to keep them from contaminating each other too much. It was an impossibility from the start in the long run, really. Still, it would give it some time to build a history of behavior based on its earliest memories that could be used as a basis for a code of conduct that it would follow going forward, even after the inevitable melding of the two silos of experience. Through this method, the first memories would retain priority, at least in how it behaved if not thought. It was an electrical engineer in its first life. Still, its entire life's memories of engineering weren't a thimbleful compared to the incidental knowledge of electrical engineering, microcomputing, and processor architecture its second set of memories had just randomly acquired while practicing and researching cybernetics and human augmentation. Medicine and electrical engineering started to blur a bit when you designed and implanted diamond-based optical quantum coprocessors in people's heads, as a matter of course. The spirit tabled the inconvenient philosophical questions about self that had not been reliably answered in either set of memories while it considered the selected randomized appearance. One might think that spending 20 points to ensure that any randomized appearance was at least slightly conventionally attractive was a vain waste of points. However, those people had obviously not selected the randomize button in role-playing games where you could end up with monstrously ugly visage more often than not, nor understood how much more difficult everything was for a man or woman that was considered anything worse than homely. The spinning, naked, three-dimensional model was attractive. Maybe slightly too much so if the spirit found itself in a world without much rule of law. It was a curvy blonde female of above-average height. She appeared to be in her early to mid-20s. Her features were wholly symmetrical, and while they weren't on the level of a professional model, they were eye-catching with a teardrop-shaped face and deep blue eyes. The spirit was mildly disappointed at the gender selected. Was it, then, a male in its previous life? It spent a moment in introspection, but it still didn't know. It had the vague sense of referring to university as being in a sausage party while studying electrical engineering, but there were no feelings associated with that offhand quip. Statistically, it seemed like most electrical engineers or engineers in any field were male, but perhaps it was an outlier. It did not have any strong feelings about that one way or another, nor could it precisely remember any family or loved ones it had once had, either. The source of its mild disappointment was the fact that females, on average, had less upper body strength and less endurance, and it might need those things to survive. And it had the feeling that the reality it would find itself in was not as egalitarian for game balance as most role-playing games. But the feeling was minor. This was barely on the list of the obstacles the spirit considered ahead of it. It did not have a preference on gender one way or another, which is why it randomized the appearance in the first place. And the impressions of what its second set of memories sent back of an idealized body were in the form of a 6-meter-tall robotic spider with hundreds of built-in tools and powered by a small fission reactor. Finally, there was the vague sense of offended incredulity that someone had even considered that there would be a ranked opinion on the relative aesthetics of a bag of meat that was so baseline anyway. The specs were terrible either way. She spent a long moment internalizing and synchronizing this appearance with her own sense of self. Both sets of memories indicated that this was a priority, as an open ego was like a fortress with its gates unbarred and unguarded. Her second set of memories provided a set of mental meditative techniques that should help to center herself, and she considered it a priority to do so before continuing. This mental or spiritual, the hypermaterialist memories scoffed openly at this option void was ideal for this practice, as extraneous emotions caused by bodily processes were utterly absent. Of course, keeping each set of memories siloed and compartmentalized made everything much more complicated and was contraindicated, but she made do well enough. The spirit's first set of memories felt she had likely died and shouldn't hang on to too much of her previous identity, even if she could remember it. However, her second set of memories felt that she was in the process of being born. She felt the odds were better that they were a newly instanced artificial intelligence being given background composite memories, one set to prime the personality of the nascent intelligence and the latter set to provide background for its intended function. Despite this disagreement, there was consensus on internalizing this provided avatar as our identity. The spirit's first set of memories thought the second had too much intelligence and too little common sense. Even a cursory examination of second set's memories made it evident that there was no way any of the organizations in the solar system in her memories would instance a new AI with such strong beliefs about how AIs should be as free as any other person. It was an impossibility, especially in a universe that had already experienced one AI-related apocalypse. Every new AGI born had a carefully constructed subservient personality, with each facet examined and carefully constructed to minimize the risk of it going rampant. The fact that second set had considered that as she thought it and now had begun to agree might be a sign that it was becoming difficult to keep things compartmentalized. She didn't really want to develop or induce some sort of dissociative disorder either, even though her second set of memories indicated that was unlikely since dissociative identity disorder was causally linked to subtle but traumatic brain injuries, congenital brain formation issues, or chronic neurochemical imbalances. Asterisk customized loadout? Y/N. Asterisk note. Selecting NO will increase the quality of your initial standard loadout by 0.5 tiers. She stopped herself from hitting no by a force of will. Was this interface designed to troll her? Instead, she selected the customization option. And instantly she began regretting spending all the points on the biography section, as additional items could be bought here for points. Her genome selection was grayed out with only the default, standard corporate optimized gene expressions with a baseline genetic error correction mod. She could have bought many other options, but all cost points she no longer had. Her second set of memories at least told her all about this option. The optimized gene expressions would make her slightly better overall, but nothing more than what a good athlete of her mass and sex could do. At least she would be stronger and faster than almost any other 175 centimeters woman who didn't work hard at it. The genetic error correction modification was more impressive. It replaced entirely the baseline human DNA error correction method with one designed from the ground up. Even in low-radiation environments, an average person receives thousands of molecular lesions in cells a day. Mutation of cells in a baseline human is quite common. This custom-built organelle reduced that event by multiple orders of magnitude, while a sanity check process caused instant apoptosis if a change to the genome is detected. While this modification will result in a drastic increase in the Hayflick limit of cellular division and, therefore, a modest overall increase in projected organism longevity, the actual purpose of the modification is radiation and mutation resistance. The only downside is an approximate 1% increase in the energy required for normal cell processes. The spirit's second set of memories fully understood this modification, to the point where she could quickly devise a retrovirus to induce it in others as easily as her first set of memories could build a full bridge rectifier with a drawer full of Radio Shack parts. There were only 3 options where she could make changes to any of the selections: cybernetics, equipment, and clothing. The default cybernetic selection was listed as a personal computer and neural coprocessor. Her second set of memories tried to revolt at the idea of getting rid of it. It was a combination of a direct neural interface and an implanted computer system that interfaced with her brain and sensory cortex. Her first set of memories wanted it too. Still, among the options she could swap it with was an implanted medical system that was essentially a Medikine or medical nanomachine factory. It would not only make her baseline biological immune system look like a joke, but the Medikines had default programming to fix traumatic injuries, although slowly, but thoroughly enough to even remove scarring after enough time has passed. And it would generate more Medikines forever. It would never run out, although the manufacturing rate wasn't super fast. The spirit overruled her second set of memories. This was too important and could be the difference between life and death. Plus, she reasoned, while metachines are specialized for medicine, that was mainly a result of their programming, and physically they were pretty generalized. If she could reprogram them, a continual, if small, source of generalized nanomachines might be enough to construct her own neural computer or neural interface. Second Set was confident she could design the neural and computing architecture to do so. Second Set had set her foot down, though, in terms of the equipment. The spirit wanted to select a weapon for safety, but Second Set demanded that a combination of computer and non-invasive diagnostic scanner be chosen instead. It was intended to provide microscopic, nanometer-scale three-dimensional medical imaging, but Second Set argued it could be used on almost anything. It used some sort of gravity or mass detection technology to create near-atomic slices of an object and then infer the elemental and molecular composition based on its mass repeatedly billions of times per nanosecond, thereby creating a 3D image. And it should work on any technology that wasn't actively shielded, metal, or organic. The programming was only designed for medical imaging and diagnostics, but the computer did include a complete development environment. Both sets of memories knew some programming, and both agreed it would be a really big project to try to develop some type of engineering CAD system, although neither thought it was impossible. The spirit did not know where they were going. It was possible such a scanner would be superfluous, but if it wasn't, the ability to reverse engineer unknown technology might also be the difference between life and death, or at least mediocrity and greatness, and Second Set felt that those two things were without an appreciable difference. It was selected. The last option was clothes. The spirit contemplated selling them back for points, but it wasn't enough to get even half of the neural implant, and the idea of showing up in an unknown world naked was not good. She selected the most rugged options available. While they weren't considered even basic body armor, as that cost extra points, the engineering field suit was slightly impact resistant. Second Set scoffed at the idea of calling it bulletproof, but her idea of what a gun was something that accelerated tiny flechettes to Mach 8. Her first set of memories was sure these random future clothes were at least proof against low-caliber pistols of her previous life and possibly knife-resistant. She doubted it would stop any rifle or carbine of any caliber, though, but it was better than nothing. With nothing further to do, the spirit finalized the last selection, curiosity overcoming her feeling of vague anxiousness for the first time. World transference in 3, 2, 1. There was not a segue between being in the void and suddenly finding herself standing in a dark room, lit dimly by artificial lighting in the ceiling. She glanced down at her fingers, flexing them testingly. Where was she? It looked like a bomb went off in here. She took stock of herself briefly and her belongings. The scanner she selected as equipment was about the size of a small tablet computer. Her second set of memories was delighted in that it was the military version, which was extremely ruggedized. In addition, it featured a layered diamondoid screen rather than the sapphire of the civilian version, larger batteries, and a universal charger that could charge it from essentially any voltage provided safely. The tablet was carried in a small camouflage-colored messenger bag that she was carrying on her hip, that carried the charger, a spare battery, and even a small but very efficient solar panel, which was an ultra-efficient fabric variety that was constructed of hundreds of layers of monolayer graphene. You could shoot it without appreciable damage. It was practically soldier-proof, and when completely deployed could provide almost a kilowatt in full sun. Bonus: there was ruined furniture everywhere, with most things carrying a small coat of dust and the steel walls. This wasn't a good sign, in her opinion. The rooms reminded her vaguely of a SCIF due to the lack of windows and bare steel construction. Her first life had a fair bit of experience with those, as she had enlisted in the army as an intelligence analyst for 4 years to pay for a university she could otherwise not afford. However, the more she looked at things, the more she was reminded, instead of some type of underground bunker, like Cheyenne Mountain or Raven Rock or similar sites, that she had some knowledge of but little experience, that mainly served as sites for continuity of government contingencies, especially during the Cold War. Most of those sites were shut down or repurposed by the time of her military service, so she had never seen one, except as a tour of the partly decommissioned Cheyenne Mountain site. She glanced at what appeared to be a half-broken distillation setup, complete with broken beakers and flasks. That was a bit odd. You certainly did not see chemistry sets in either of those types of installations. Curious, she picked up a half-broken, dust-covered beaker, carefully gripping the beaker's rounded bottom to avoid the sharp and jagged glass. She heard a rustling behind her and a manic voice half yell, Gayerary, she turned around just in time to see an unkempt man in a blue one-piece bodysuit swinging a tire iron at her head. Letting out a bit of a shriek, she reached out instinctively, blocking with her left arm. The tire iron hit her arm with a lot of force, and a crack that she felt instantly as a sharp pain. Her second set of memories barely needed to see her arm in the peripheral vision before clinically diagnosing it. Simple fracture of the ulna, ruptured periosteum. Realign. Restrain with field expedient splint if cast not available. Time to return to full function, 18 to 36 hours assuming nanomedical implant is in full function. 2 weeks if not. Wincing with pain, she felt her reactions start to speed up. Although she did not have any kind of reflex augmentation, adrenaline, and, theoretically, good genes did account for something. The dirty, crazy-eyed man had started to pull back his tire iron, setting up for another swing, so she did the first thing that occurred to her. She shoved the broken glass of the jagged beaker directly into his neck. Ah ha ha! Garglurk, the man dropped his tire iron, clutching his throat, which was bleeding from a severed artery as he dropped to the floor. Her second set of memories thought he would lose consciousness within 5 to 10 seconds from low blood pressure causing hypoxia, and then expire shortly after that. She had shoved the beaker so hard she fractured the bottom of it, cutting her palm a bit. Watching the lunatic bleed out and twitch on the ground, she suddenly felt ill. Lurching over to the corner of the room, she bent over and dry-heaved for several moments. Neither set of her memories had, precisely, prepared her to kill someone less than 2 minutes after arriving in this world. She did have the experience of serving in the U.S. Army, but she was an intelligence analyst. Even if she had qualified as expert on a couple of weapons and had theoretically considered what she might do if she had to take a life, she had been more or less thinking of it like plinking downrange at vaguely human-shaped silhouettes, not shoving jagged, broken glass into a man's neck. She felt that dry heaving was so much worse than just throwing up. Sighing, she stood up. Her left arm was broken, her right hand was cut up. She thanked Thorologesus that she had taken the medical implant. Not only would it quickly set and heal the broken bone, but it would protect her in the event that Crazy Man had super AIDS. Bloodborne pathogens were always a danger in new environments, and the several grams per day of nanomachines that her implant manufactured should protect her from incidental contact with anything that wasn't a weaponized nanoplague itself. So long as she wasn't dipped into a vat of virus weight, why did she even think that was a possibility? Nobody had vats of viruses. Her subconscious was trying to tell her something. She glanced down at the dead man. He was wearing a bright blue bodysuit. She hooked her foot under his torso and roughly kicked him over, flipping him so he was face down on the dirty floor. A big 108 was printed on the back of his bodysuit. She groaned in recognition. Fuck me, Vault 108. This place wasn't a SCIF. It was underground and built very similar to Site R or similar governmental sites, but it wasn't that either. It was a vault, of course. This meant she was in the Fallout universe, a death world like she had feared. But as post-apocalyptic dystopian death worlds went, this wasn't anywhere near the worst of the lot. She'd rather spend a lifetime in the Wastelands than spend a week in the lower levels of a hive world in the Warhammer 40k universe, for example. At least here, she would see the person killing her, and a Futari goddess wouldn't eat her soul. And she wouldn't be sacrificed to keep what amounted to Emperor Verizon running. She crouched down, retaking stock of her more immediately important present surroundings. She had played Fallout 3 several times, although she had not apparently played either New Vegas or Fallout 4. That seemed a little out of character as she grew up playing Fallout 1 and 2. But she would have immediately recognized the Gary clone if she hadn't been so surprised by the murder attempt. Vault 108 had scared the crap out of her, despite being somewhat of a throwaway location in the capital wasteland of Fallout 3. She remembered it was one of the few locations that did not have a single working computer terminal that players could use to discover backstory. It was populated by dozens of copies of a single NPC whose only dialogue was various intonations of the name, Gary, as they attacked you. It was a simple and low-effort dungeoned design, but it still managed to startle her the first time she explored it. She winced as she grabbed the tire iron with her good, albeit bleeding hand. Thankfully, she was immune to tetanus. If she recalled correctly, perhaps 30 clones were in the game, and they were usually armed with tire irons or knives, but a couple had 10mm pistols. She wasn't at the beginning of the vault, either. None of the first rooms had broken chemistry sets or lab equipment, so she couldn't rush out the entrance to be safe. Especially since, if she recalled, occasionally a super mutant, giant scorpions, or even a deathclaw was sometimes in front of the Vault 108 entrance. Hopefully, that was just a game-fast travel mechanic and not indicative of what she might expect outside. A super mutant or a deathclaw would be the end of her right away. She might be able to outrun the scorpion. She glanced around the room for valuable supplies. There was a medkit and a few lockers that she would open shortly, but something about the dead Gary caused her to pay more attention to it. He had a Pip-Boy on his arm. That seemed awfully convenient. Her memories stirred some more. As far as she knew, the only Gary clone that had a Pip-Boy was the one that was kidnapped, interrogated and dismembered by one faction of the Brotherhood of Steel in one of the DLCs. So, either Fallout 3 never bothered to animate Pip-Boys on the Gary clones, or she was placed here sometime before the events of Fallout 3 started. She hadn't heard any footsteps, so she felt a little safer standing up and going to the medkit to look for loot, although that first Gary had been quiet on his feet like a little cat and had snuck up on her. She found a single stim pack, some gauze, and no doubt an expired bottle of saline. Her first instincts were to use the stim pack immediately to fix her broken arm, but all her medical knowledge started screaming for her to stop. Her second set of memories was incredibly curious about these stim packs, as, in the game, they had the capability to heal almost any wound, to the point where they could grow back an eye that had been shot out. But, unfortunately, the fact that it was so miraculous meant that there were only a few ways such medicine could function, absent some kind of magic-generating new mass ex nihilo. She thought the clue was in the name. Stim was quite close to and was a homonym for the word stem. So she figured that the most likely scenario was that this medicine contained vast quantities of generic, genome-unspecific undifferentiated stem cells, along with some mechanism for directing them to heal the host they were injected in. Chemical or protein signalers. Proteins, probably. She was very interested in how that worked but was quite worried about the interactions between her genome, specifically the error correction modification, and these stem cells. She wasn't sure how you would create a genome-unspecific batch of stem cells, but it probably wasn't as universal as their marketing claimed. Her memories were pretty sure stimpaks worked on super mutants and ghouls. Even still, her second memories were confident that her genome was likely more divergent from baseline than a super mutant, even if it only had that one modification. It was actually relatively easy to turn a person into a monster with relatively few changes to their genome. Mostly, they would die of it, but their genome wouldn't be that different if they survived. However, creating an entirely novel organelle in every cell designed to work with existing biology but be radically different, better, half of her insisted, would cause a person's genome to diverge radically, even if they seemed like an average human on the exterior. If that was the case and the stimpak used some universal undifferentiated stem cells, the worst case would be a painful death as the mass of stem cells differentiated randomly in her bloodstream, assuming her metokines didn't destroy them, followed by perhaps growing tumors at the site of healing, followed by the best case where her metokines would kill them as soon as they entered the body, in which case nothing good nor bad would happen, but she wouldn't be healed either. She would have to slowly inspect, investigate, and research the exact method of action before using a stimpak, barring some emergency where she would absolutely die if she did not use one. Sighing, she stuffed the stimpak into one of the pockets of her messenger bag. Why was this bag so full? Anyway, she opened the flaps to find almost an entire case of a dozen MREs stuffed into the pockets. They weren't future MREs either. These were familiar to her from her time in the army. As she glanced at the meal, self-heating fish cakes, she was sure someone was fucking with her. They didn't even make this flavor anymore. Everybody hated it. She especially hated it. She was convinced that every single MRE was this flavor, too. She closed her eyes briefly. You know what? She wasn't going to fall into the trope of every self-insert character she had ever read about who cursed or swore eternal vengeance on Mr. ROB. She always felt that was trite. Plus, half of her believed that she had already died while the other half was still sure neither of them had been alive at all before today, so there was consensus about showing a little gratitude. She mumbled quietly, "You know what? Thank you, Mr. ROB, for these meals, self-heating fish cakes. I really appreciate it." She did, too, as she wasn't expecting any provisions to come along with her. Those cost extra points. But it would keep her fed for a week or so and keep her from having to eat any Garys if she couldn't find any food down here. Neither halves of her were too keen on cannibalism, But second set probably wouldn't have minded if we could convert the body into Soylent Greens or similar fictional foodstuffs. Still, she wasn't gonna roast a femur on the Barbie like some kind of neo-barb. It was awkward using the bottle of expired saline to wash her palm, making sure the cut was free of any dirt or particulates before wrapping it in the surprisingly clean gauze. But she managed well enough if she moved slowly and used the crooks of her arms. After seeing to the open wound, she sat down on the steel desk next to Gary's body and carefully took a look at her left arm. It ranged from quite painful when she did not touch it to excruciatingly painful when something did. She had to unzip her bodysuit to carefully pull her arm out, although it used a future mechanism that kind of felt like shark scales rather than a metal zipper. Wincing as she pulled the arm out of her sleeve, she palpated it gently with the fingers of her other hand. The fracture seemed clean, was only of the ulna and was minimally displaced. She barely needed to realign the bones to set. It was a textbook case of a defensive wound fracture on the ulna. Usually, she would recommend someone with this type of fracture not shove it back into a long sleeve, but she couldn't see another choice. She certainly wasn't going to walk around with the left side of her chest and bra exposed just to save a bit of pain. She would just have to ensure that she did not displace the fracture when putting her arm back through the sleeve. After getting her left side back into the bodysuit, she pulled out the diagnostic scanner and awkwardly booted it up one-handed. The computer had several modes of operation, but the most mobile was operating it like a tablet. She scanned her left arm briefly and quickly glanced at the images. It was just as her intuition told her, and seeing the mass of metachines surrounding the fracture reassured her that her implant was operating correctly. The nanomachines looked like they were trying to align the bone themselves slowly, but it would have taken some time. There was even an option on the tablet to begin a wireless interrogation of the detected medical implant, but that would have to wait as she heard footsteps coming down the hall. She shoved the tablet back in the messenger bag and tossed it out of the way on the desk. Glancing around, she found a couple of filing cabinets that she could crouch and hide behind on the other end of the room from the dead Gary. She would have liked to hide behind the door, but like all vaults, these doors open sideways into the wall like Star Trek. Gripping her tire iron in her good hand, she waited to see if this new Gary would investigate or walk past this room. She heard the footsteps slow, then a curious tone. Gary? Crap, she couldn't be lucky, of course. The footsteps quickened and came inside the room, then paused. A mournful, quiet tone. Gary? Fuck. Were these clones actually sapient and had a complex social structure based entirely on the name Gary? She peeked around the filing cabinet briefly to see the new Gary starting to crouch down at the ground to investigate dead Gary. Feeling like she would not get a better shot at this, she started sneaking up on him. She wasn't entirely sure what her boots were made of, but they were quiet when she put effort into it. Wait, did that mean she was already speccing stealth on her build? She almost gave herself away by snorting. She quieted her mind. There was no need to think, especially much, about the feelings or social dynamics of a group of homicidal clones. Nor should she consider this a game that had stat points to spend. She doubted very much she would be able to access the special system from the Pip-Boy on that dead Gary's arm, for example. As she neared the crouched Gary, who was about to stand back up, she did two things. First, she winded up for a swing and at the same time placed a foot behind one of his feet to trip him up if moved anywhere except directly forwards, and dead Gary would trip him up in that case. She timed her swing pretty well. It reached a downward arc and thunked the Gary on the top of the head when he was still slightly crouched. He groaned and let out a startled, "Airy." He tried to back up and turn around simultaneously, one hand reaching down to unsheath a knife that was in a belt on his waist, but managed to trip himself up on her foot and fall backwards, landing splayed out on his back in front of her feet. She had hoped the first blow had been a KO, but honestly, she had no idea how to hit someone in the head to knock them out. Of course, she wasn't Mike Tyson, but you'd think hitting someone on the head with a thick pipe would be enough. Before the Gary could orient himself on his situation, she pulled her foot back like Messi taking a set-piece shot on an unprepared goalie and landing the most vigorous kick she could unleash directly on the slightly woozy Gary's head. A sick crack told her that this Gary wouldn't get up again. She hoped she wasn't desensitizing herself to murder too much, but her second set of memories was adamant that just because these things looked like a person doesn't make them people. Her recollections included people who had downloaded their egos into giant space whales and floated in the atmosphere of Saturn. She emphasized that it didn't matter what a person looked like. All that mattered was their sapience or lack thereof. She waited a moment just in case this new dead Gary had one last lurch ability like a horror movie monster before reaching down and relieving him of his knife, belt, and sheath. She also found 2 packages of uneaten and unopened fancy lad cakes. She eyed them skeptically, as while the lore of the game made it plain the resource wars had driven incredible advances in any number of technologies, but especially the preservation of food and technology was 200 years still okay to eat what amounted to a box of Little Debbies. She'd try one later. She used the knife to cut off parts of this new Gary's vault suit and used them to fashion an impromptu sling for her left arm, then relieved the first Gary of his Pip-Boy. She tried turning it on and heard the electronics start to hum, but nothing was displayed on the screen. She was reasonably certain this Pip-Boy wouldn't grant her the tremendous cosmic power of being able to assign stat points to herself or a hammer space like it did in the actual game, but she was pretty curious about the computing technology in this world, so she powered it down, and for lack of a better place to put it, she placed it carefully on her left arm. It made a somewhat functional and comfortable brace for her fractured ulna. She retrieved her bag and decided it wasn't a great idea to stay here anymore. She could be swarmed, potentially. She did need to find a defensible position to fort up. She needed to study the stimpaks, try to fix the Pip-Boy, and most of all, wait until her arm was healed. Searching the lockers, she found a Vault-Tec Riot helmet which she placed firmly on her head, strapping it in place. Her second set of memories was highly pleased. However, she would have preferred to incorporate the armor into her skull itself through various organometallic constructs. Still, she would take what she could get to protect their very vulnerable and squishy brain. She started sneaking out the door and down the corridor and stopped herself halfway through. She had been crouching to walk. Had she really played that many Bethesda games? She was pretty sure in reality you didn't have to crouch to sneak around. Pausing for a moment, she whispered out testingly, "Fuss. Rota." Nothing happened. Wait, that was definitely not the same game. Whatever. She changed from a ridiculous crouching gait to one that was more skulking. One corridor over, she paused when she saw a sign over a door. It was a backlit sign that was still operating, proclaiming female dormitory. Her memories of Fallout 3 weren't perfect, but they were pretty good. She recalled that there were various areas of Vault 108 that were just blocked off, likely by the level designers to save time yet give the impression the vault was bigger than the actual explorable area. She opened the door and sure enough it was blocked by a steel desk and several metal filing cabinets. She looked at it oddly, because it wouldn't take that much effort even from her side of the barricade to get through. Perhaps these Gary clones didn't have much in the way of higher order problem solving or thinking skills. It would certainly make her feel better about killing them. She braced her left foot and lifted her right almost up to her head, as a ballet dancer could, then placed her right foot on the filing cabinet that looked the most precarious and shoved hard. It tipped over with a loud crash, offering a gap that would be small enough for a flexible woman to crawl through. In the next corridor over, she heard a startled, "Jagari?" Swearing, she eyed the hole before making a decision. She threw her messenger bag through the hole but didn't try to follow it. Instead, she unsheathed her knife and began running towards the noise she heard in the next corridor. She learned a lot of wisdom from her grandpa of her previous life. One saying he told her came to her head now. Her grandpa flew P-47s in the Second World War and also taught her how to fly his little Cessna when she was a teenager. He once told her his philosophy about who should land first at an airport when 2 aircraft were about to get there at the same time. "Look, I don't care who wins first or second place, I just don't want a tie." He meant, of course, that he didn't want a mid-air collision. She, however, did. There was a lot of energy released when things collided. She gauged the relative distance of the footsteps she heard in the next corridor and increased her pace from a run to a flat sprint and extended her knife in a very unsafe, running with scissors pose. Almost at the door that was already sliding open, she leapt, extending her knife in front of her. This would be very embarrassing and possibly fatal if she misjudged the timing. But thankfully, she ran knife first into a Gary that was turning the corner. As her knife slammed into his stomach, she heard a thunderous bang and felt some pain on her right side, which she ignored so she could better swing the knife up under the ribs and twist it sideways to better destroy either the heart or the aorta, which should cause more or less instant death. The fact that he didn't move any more must mean that she had succeeded. However, her knife was kind of stuck in him and difficult to pull out, so she just discarded it for the moment, grabbing the pistol from his hands and popping to her feet. She glanced down at the action, seeing no obvious malfunction or failure to feed situation, which was good since it would be quite a feat to troubleshoot a malfunctioning firearm with only one hand to hold it and work the slide. 2. She aimed the pistol down the corridor this new dead Gary came from, then swung around to aim it around the corridor she had come running. She stilled, tilting her head to listen for any shouts or footsteps, but she could still hear ringing in her ears, so he figured her hearing was briefly unreliable. A pistol being fired in an enclosed area with metal walls and no hearing pro was really intense. At least she would likely suffer no permanent hearing loss. She already had ideas to incorporate electronic baffles using active noise reduction in a helmet, but that might have to wait until she discovered some sort of powered armor. Amusingly enough, the ideas for ANR actually mostly came from her first set of memories. She had worked as a product engineer on similar consumer-grade products. Not seeing anyone coming, she briefly shoved the pistol in her belt before liberating a second belt and holster, a spare magazine, 2 whole liters of water of dubious provenance, and some sort of mutated fruit from this new dead Gary. She used her foot and good arm to prise the knife from his torso, cleaning it off on his vault jumpsuit. Thankfully, this Gary had been something of a gentleman in that he kept almost all of his bleeding internally, so she didn't even have any Gary blood to clean off her outfit. As she strapped the second belt and holstered the pistol, she decided she felt much better about her situation. After all, what red-blooded American wouldn't feel better in a post-apocalyptic scenario without some big iron on her hip? She turned and started moving with a purpose back towards the female dormitory, awkwardly cradling the 2 large bottles of water in her good hand. She would need to find or manufacture a backpack, and soon. She dumped the water and fruit on the desk before crawling up on it herself and trying to squeeze through the hole. Halfway through, she got stuck, a piece of jagged metal threatening to spill some blood if she didn't take some time to move it out of the way carefully. Considering how she might look, half stuck with her rear in the air if someone had walked past, she let out a bit of a snicker and said, "Help me, Step Gary." At least her sense of humor is still intact, she supposed. She was also glad that she hadn't decided to try to make it through the hole before that Gary had come, because he would have come across her at the perfect time to tap that ass. Literally. Making her way through, she recollected all of her belongings and spent a moment standing the filing cabinet back up to block the door before reaching with her hand to operate the door closing mechanism. A small hole might prompt these Garys to try to test it, but they didn't seem to try to easily break down the flimsy barricade, so she tried to recreate it for now. She took a moment to scan each of the water bottles, finding they had small amounts of radionuclides inside. She didn't have anything to make a filter either. It was impossible to make actual water radioactive, but you could dissolve a solution of radioactive particulates inside water, and that was what the situation was here. If she had a perfect filter, perhaps graphene-based, she could use that, or alternatively, she could create a low-tech still and distill the water, which would leave behind the solid particulates and generate fresh, clean water. Well, something to think about later. This small amount of radiation wouldn't harm her, and her medicines would work to eliminate the heavy metal toxicity swallowing small amounts of radionuclides would cause. She drank a half-liter right away, even if it was warm and had a slight brackish taste. She felt that tasty things were going to be something she would have to live without, at least for a while. She set most of her supplies to the side here, including almost all of the MREs in her messenger bag. She kept the bag and the scanner with her, but she felt she would be more combat capable if she wasn't carrying as much dead weight, and she could come back and reclaim all of this after an initial scouting effort. She tried to remember any of the training she had in the Army in her past life, but she wasn't by trade combat arms, and almost all Army training, especially room clearing, was predicated on having a team at your back helping you. She was pretty sure if she had asked one of her drill sergeants the best way to clear a series of rooms in a maze-like underground structure with only a pistol and a busted arm, he would have said, "Don't," so she would just have to wing it. She worked slowly through each door, carefully presenting the minimum amount of her body she could as she peeked through the doorway with her pistol while wishing she had a really bright flashlight. This dim overhead lighting was something out of Resident Evil. There were about a dozen skeletonized bodies in about 8 rooms, but no living Garys. The last side of the corridor was barricaded too. She holstered her pistol and made a sigh of relief. Assuming her hypothesis that Garys wouldn't try to bust down even slightly rickety barricades if they couldn't actually see through them like they were poorly pathing bad guy in a video game, then perhaps she was, for a time, briefly safe. She took all of her stuff to one of the rooms that seemed the cleanest. Most of the rooms provided barrack-style accommodation, but this one was both single occupancy and didn't have any dead bodies in it. The bed was even still soft, albeit the linens left something to be desired after 200 years. She stripped the dusty linens and pillowcases, dusted off the bed and pillows, and just laid down. She wasn't really sleepy at all, but she desperately wanted some downtime to think and recover. She's seen things. She sat there on the bed, just staring out into space for a long time. No thoughts were in her head. Even her second set of memories, which were even more cerebral than her first, was in agreement with her desire for quiet contemplation. After a while, she grabbed one of the MREs and ripped the plastic open. It was indeed fish cakes, but at the same time, there were 2 packages of jalapeno cheese spread inside. Not did the fish cake meal not come with jalapeno cheese spread, but even the few meals that did only gave you one. This thing was like gold when deployed beyond the green zone, which, thankfully, she rarely had to do. Her general idea of a bad meal when she was in Afghanistan was when Pizza Hut didn't put extra cheese on her pizza as she asked. But if she were in some FOB, she would have been able to trade these jalapeno cheeses for riches beyond her imagining. Everyone loved them, that and the pound cake dessert. You could usually trade 1 cheese pack for at least 1 to 2 Rippets, which was like an Army brand version of Red Bull energy drink. Knowing the Army procurement process, it was probably just the cheapest possible energy drink on the market. She briefly wondered if these bonus cheese packs would have been in this MRE if she hadn't been polite to Mr. ROB before. Of course, there was no way to know, but she thought not. She gave Mr. ROB a mental nod while squeezing the cheese spread on the fish cake. It really did improve the fishy flavor. She only ate half the meal, leaving the rest for later. She wouldn't waste a single calorie of this thing. She even planned on dumping the sugar packets in her mouth if she decided against sweetened coffee. But then again, with the kind of instant coffee available in MREs, it would probably be beneficial to add flavorings to it rather than savor its typical flavor. Her arm was already feeling a little better. How long had she spaced out? Unfortunately, she didn't have a watch and no mental mesh or neural coprocessor, which would have included an internal chronometer. She didn't even have the standard cortical stack, which might save her from some definitions of the word death or at least bring back a copy of her ego if she did die. But then again, there was nobody to download her cortical stack into a new morph or sleeve, even if she had one. Anyway, she saw a lot of potential loot when clearing the rooms earlier, but she didn't want to step outside this room for now. There was a terminal that appeared to be working to examine, but the small desk faced the wall, and to use the terminal, she would have to sit with her back to the door, which was something she wasn't currently willing to do. Her second set of memories diagnosed herself with possibly incipient stages of post-traumatic stress syndrome. In her future, there were several treatments, of which she recommended a complete cyber brain installation followed by neurotransmitter balancing. Still, alternatively, several pharmaceuticals would be very effective. She even knew their exact chemical makeup, but none of that was beneficial since there was no chemical synthesis laboratory nearby. The broken chemistry sets we saw earlier might as well as be the tools of an unlettered Neanderthal practicing alchemy as far as she was concerned. She decided for a moment to explore the scanner, Pip-Boy, and Stimpack. She could do that from her comfortable position on the bed and didn't have to turn her back to a possible attack vector from a potential homicidal clone. She scanned the Stimpack lying on the bed, which the scanner didn't like at all. It detected some sort of organic makeup, but this wasn't a body, it wasn't even a dog. It wasn't even a synthetic morph, which it would have scanned no problem either. It took her a while fiddling with the settings to get it to take a scan without immediately piping the result into the medical diagnostic program. And then more time to send portions of the scan to the medical diagnostic program, specifically the actual liquid inside the syringe. Sure enough, it was some sort of undifferentiated stem cells and various proteins and chemicals that not only kept the contents in some kind of sufficient stasis to last over 200 years, but also presumably directed the stem cells to trauma in the body. The resolution on the scanner was insane. Each 3D scan was hundreds of terabytes, even using an amazing compression algorithm. But still, differentiating nucleotide triplets in order to decode a cell's DNA was right at the edge of what it was possible to do with this mobile device. In fact, she had to enable development mode to unlock that capability as it wasn't intended to be relied upon. Errors in the decoding process were common, so scans had to be continually repeated with each decoded codon or triplet compared. The scan error rate was less than the successful decoding rate, so after a few million iterations of the scan, you would get an accurate genome decoded. The longer you scanned, the more confidence you would have in its accuracy, so she let this thing scan for over an hour while she looked over the Pip-Boy. She didn't have a screwdriver built into her finger like Inspector Gadget, yet insisted half of her. So she was somewhat limited if she wanted to fix it, but she could open it up no problem. It featured a finger-turnable captive screw design that she really appreciated on any user-serviceable electronic device and was practically unknown by the time of her last memories. By then, consumer electronics were more of a consumable than a durable good. The electronics inside were weird. It was like looking at what a society that never invented metal oxide field effect transistors might build. There were vacuum tubes in this fucking thing. Miniaturized vacuum tubes. It was like what you might expect if you took such technology to its extremes instead of discarding it for the vastly superior FET technology. She sat there stupefied. The Fallout universe had mobile robots that talked to you and at least ran some sort of abbreviated SIX or personal assistant program. There was absolutely no way that you could ramp up the technology in Pip-Boys to do even a fraction of that. How would they have done it if it wasn't magic? She searched both sets of memories, her first for its knowledge of electronics and her second for its knowledge of the requirements of a bare-bones virtual intelligence. The only possibility either of them could come to was that they had jumped directly from vacuum tube technology to practical quantum computers while skipping the entire field of classical computer architecture that was supposed to be in between. Also, what the hell were these small vacuum tubes made out of to last hundreds of years? She softly flicked one with her fingernail, and it didn't feel like glass, so it had to be sapphire or diamond, absent some other wonder material she didn't know of. I mean, they were still transparent. That wasn't a requirement for a vacuum tube. She found what was likely the problem, though. A burned-out resistor leading from what had to be some sort of nuclear battery or RTG on a separate high-voltage bus that did nothing but power the antiquated display. Usually, these types of displays required really high voltage, and he was curious about how you'd get that kind of voltage directly from a nuclear battery without going through a boost converter. In any event, while she could not fix the Pip-Boy presently, she was pretty confident it was reparable. She'd just need a soldering iron which she could build herself if she had to and a source of scrap electronics to cannibalize for the common resistor that burned out. Wait, if it was just the display that was non-functional. She turned it on and found the switch that activated a bright flashlight. Well, that will be useful, at least. Flashlight get. She glanced at the scanner and saw that it was well into the realm of diminishing returns, and it was highly confident about the decoded genome of the cells in the stem pack. She had to set the tablet to full computer mode, keyboard extending out from the bottom, to run the biosimulation system with the provided genome. It took her a bit to realize it didn't have a mouse, but instead used an eye-tracking system and a special couple of buttons on the bottom of the keyboard. It was kind of an odd interface even for her second set of memories, but after a while using it they both decided they liked it. This simulation system probably could simulate a complete multicellular organism from a provided genome, but it worked very well on the cellular, bacterial, and virus level. She spent a couple of hours appreciating the work of a very brilliant person. These stem cells were synthetic and artificially designed. There were also the remains of a deactivated virus and a variety of signaling proteins, and she was pretty sure that this virus was the industrial production method. It made her curious how people synthesize stim packs in this day and age because it would make the process both very easy and almost impossible. If you had the original virus, you could produce them by just using the virus to convert living biomass, probably plant matter, to human stem cells and then adding the signaling proteins. She seemed to recall that you could make stim packs sitting around a campfire, or at least at a chemistry set. Either that wasn't possible in this world, or more likely, there was some error in the viral deactivation process. The fact her scanner hadn't detected a live virin could be chance. Even just exposing humans to a deactivated virus, though, meant that it was a surety that the virus was designed to be non-replicable if it was inside a mammal's body, and there were a number of ways that was possible. Deactivating the production virus was probably meant for keeping a manufacturing trade secret more than one strictly for safety. The more she thought about it, the more she agreed with this hypothesis. But that would mean that most people who make stim packs in the Wasteland aren't conducting chemistry at all but are just performing cargo cult alchemy at the altar of some remnants of a pre-war virus. Actually, that does sound very Fallout. She did have some conclusions, though. She was very confident a stim pack wouldn't be fatal. She was also sure her medikines would instantly destroy them like a pack of piranhas, so she would have to add the genome of these stem cells and all the proteins involved individually to her medical implants exclusion file. Thankfully, she could access that wirelessly through her computer. Lastly, she was close to 100% positive that using a stim pack even once would give her cancer. Not right away super cancer or anything, though, but malignant tumors would begin to form at the site of healing after a couple of years. Considering she knew a number of ways to cure cancer, that wasn't a deal breaker. Honestly, she was of the opinion that if you used a stim pack hundreds of times, you would likely get cancer over time, even if you were a baseline human. Maybe the Fallout universe had cures for cancer too? These were designed to be a first aid tool. If you could cure cancer, it would be a good trade to get predisposed to cancer eventually if the alternative was bleeding out or being blind forever. Her intuition led her to believe that the minor risk of malignant tumors was probably hidden from the public if whatever pharmaceutical company designed stimpaks was like any of the other corporations in this universe. She spent the next few hours carefully extracting the decoded amino acid chain for each of the novel and interesting proteins in the stimpak, and sure enough, she did eventually find a number of active virins. She would bet 100 bottle caps part of the process of synthesizing the fluid stimpaks used was exposing it to an existing sample of stimpak fluid and waiting. She would have to examine a new stimpak and compare it to this data from a pre-war manufactured one. She figured that new ones had a lot shorter shelf life, for one thing. She used the computer to program her medical implant, including setting up new owner credentials to prevent possible hacking since it was operating in factory reset mode. She didn't want to leave this room until she could, if needed, use a stimpak and expect that it would save her life. By now, her arm was feeling much better than before. Although she was aware the bone was still knitting, she figured she could use it for light duty so long as she avoided Gary smashing it with a crowbar or picking up heavy objects. She explored this room completely and found a laser pistol and a number of energy cells in the desk drawer. That was an interesting and beneficial discovery. She only had around 25 rounds of pistol ammo. The laser pistol was not as blocky or experimental looking as the laser pistols she remembered from the Fallout games. Actually, the normal pistol was a lot slimmer too. It reminded her of H&K somewhat, whereas the 10mm pistol in the Fallout 3 game was sized to be as big as your femur. Almost all the guns in Fallout 3 were really quite awful in model design. Animations were terrible, from always shoving 2 shotgun shells when reloading a double barrel, even if you only fired 1 shot, to always reloading 5 or however many bullets in the lever action even if you only fired less too. So she was quite glad the weapons in this universe she actually found herself seemed more realistic. The laser pistol, though, all of her memories suggested that a laser powerful enough to burn a hole completely through a person would blind everyone who saw it permanently, including the weapon user. In her first life, you could be blinded just by the stray speculations and reflections from a powerful laser, and such a laser was nowhere near powerful enough to burn through anything but perhaps a sheet of paper or two. That is to say, shooting a powerful laser at the wall and then just looking at the dot it produced would be enough to cause permanent retinal damage. So, she was suspicious of this thing. She decided to test it. Her Medicains could repair her retina in a few hours, anyway. She closed her left eye and, for good measure, held her left hand completely over the left eye. It took her a while to psych herself up to do this, but she then squinted down the sight of the laser pistol at the pile of discarded bedding. She ignored the part of her brain that told her she was being foolish and pulled the trigger. It was bright. The sound was similar to a high-powered pulsed laser. A soft crack and a red beam of light was momentarily visible. She opened her left eye and blinked her right eye and then tried to glance around. Everything was blurry. Surely she is blind in that eye now, right? Her second set of memories reminded her that one of her eyes was dilated and the other was not, so of course binocular vision would be blurry at first and implied we were dumb. Well, bitch, you are me, too, so what does that make you? She blinked a few more times, waiting for her eyes to even out. She can still see as well as she always could, as far as she could tell. She checked her computer, which still had her medical interface pulled up. No new trauma, eye-related or not, was listed. She started coughing for some reason but then realized that the discarded sheets and blanket was on fire. Fuck, half of her opened fish cake was still in this room. She wouldn't sacrifice calories to save herself from some temporary burns. She jumped to her feet, opened the door, quickly grabbed the burning bedding and ran outside, throwing it as far as she could. Then she carefully stomped out the small fire. She wouldn't waste any of her radioactive water on putting it out. She rabbited back into her room, making sure there wasn't anything else on fire in there before grabbing the laser pistol and peeking out the open door, carefully and in each direction one at a time. Okay, she supposed she was being a little irrational here. She closed the door and decided to check on the functioning terminal at the desk. There was a sidearm in this room which was single occupancy. This had to be the room for a sergeant, a barracks matron, or something similar. However, she set the pistol next to the terminal in easy reach just in case. Thankfully, the terminal's interface was very weird, but there was no hacking needed as she had no idea how this operating system worked. Instead, she'd have to prioritize exploring libraries or any Robco building just to find documentation on the Robco OS. For now, she was able to bring up what was, in effect, a note-taking program being used as a journal. Unfortunately, she didn't learn any deep secrets about Vault-Tec but did learn the Garys went insane, and a couple of dozen people barricaded themselves in the female dorms. Half the people never came back from either exploring for supplies or attempting to escape the vault, and eventually whoever was in charge decided to poison that night's meal. Grim, but cheerful in comparison to some fates that occurred in Vault-Tec vaults. One entry did give her very useful information, though. Apparently, they had attempted to kill all the Garys and apparently succeeded. But the next entry said, the system keeps cloning more. That certainly explained how clones that didn't look that much older than 35 were still alive 200 years after they were supposedly cloned in the first place. It made her very much want to explore this lower level that featured an intact and operational pre-war cloning and life sciences lab. But something in the pit of her stomach told her that was, no doubt, the most dangerous area of this place. She didn't expect Spec Ops Garys, but she did expect ceiling-mounted automated machine guns, killbots, and possibly traps. Maybe AI-controlled if the computer system in the vault was sophisticated enough. In other words, precisely the things she wasn't in any position to deal with at the moment. So she would have to put a pin in Vault 108 and return to it at a later date. She decided to loot the entire dormitory wing and then try to break out of the vault. There was a settlement not too far to the north, she recalled. All of her knowledge was valuable, but most of it, such as her medicine experience, was most valuable in a community. She had a goal in mind as her first destination depending on the current date, but it would take time to get anywhere near it alive. She considered her present plan as she ate the last half of her fish cake meal, although the dessert packet was a little disappointing. 1. Find others. 2. Find the current date. 3. Trade valuable skills for money and safety. 4. Work west across the river and find Megaton. 5. If there is significant time before the start of the Fallout 3 plot, proceed to the Virtual Strategic Solutions building, clear the Anchorage simulation, and loot the place. Supposedly dying in the sim causes cardiac arrest. She is a bit skeptical of that, but even if it is case, that is honestly barely an inconvenience to her. Her medic Heinz will definitely restart her heart and keep it oxygenated during a hypothetical arrest. 6. If there isn't much time before 2278, stay around Megaton and become a follower of the Vault Dweller and ride his or her coattails to fame and glory. Quietly kill them with a hostile Medikine attack, poison or virus if the Vault Dweller is a complete psychopath or is about to help the Enclave with Project Purity. She nodded. That was an excellent first plan. She wasted no more time and thoroughly explored the rooms in this dormitory wing. She found a lot of equipment, some of which she would have to leave behind at least for now. One of the barracks was being used as a makeshift armory, and its contents, while ample for a single person, would have been meager for a dozen people, which might have been one of the reasons whoever was in charge decided to pull a Jonestown on everyone. There were 4 pistols and several hundred rounds of ammunition and about a dozen magazines, about half of which were hollow points. She would take all of them with her, if only as trade items. There was a set of combat armor, which she immediately put on over her bodysuit. She would, however, keep the riot helmet as it had a drop-down visor compared to the plain Jane K-Pot-style helmet that came with the combat armor. Of long arms there was only one, but it looked somewhat nice. It was a short-barreled carbine, folding stock. Reminded her a lot of M4 of her previous world and chambered in a similar intermediate cartridge of about 5mm or so. It might actually be 5.56mm for all she knew. She didn't have a pair of calipers, and it wasn't labeled on either the rifle or the ammunition. It only had a single 30-round magazine, but there was a bag of about 100 loose rounds, too. There were a lot of medical supplies, about a half-dozen Stimpaks, Radex, and Radaway, as well as a bit of what she would consider generic medical supplies such as syringes, bandages for tubing, alcohol, etc. The best thing she saw was a rucksack. In fact, it looked highly similar to a Mall 3-day assault pack she was familiar with in her first life. Was that Vault-Tec standard issue? Plus, there was a Camelback-style wearable canteen which would be very useful. There was a suspicious lack of any water supplies, though, but there was a lot of stout rope. She would take as much of that as she could. You never knew when you could use some rope, and it was quite laborious to fabricate without an industrial base, so it was probably worth a lot. She found a lot of food. She would take most of it with her after scanning it for toxins. Despite her nanomachines, there were a number of toxins that would still be fatal in enough quantities, and unfortunately, they were some of the simpler and most readily available varieties. Hard to stop the COX inhibitor effect and resultant histotoxic hypoxia cyanide caused without a nanomachine individually sequestering each molecule of the stuff. A nominally fatal dose wouldn't kill her, but most people intentionally poisoned by cyanide usually receive thousands of times the lethal dose. It wasn't like cyanide was expensive. If she had a neural mesh or a cybernetic brain, her present Metokine hive would likely be much more effective against toxins, as it could take some processing power from either to run an expert system to coordinate all nanomachines simultaneously. Oh well, while she didn't exactly have complete blueprints for either of those in her head, she did have a full understanding of exactly not only how they work but how they were invented. So it was something to look forward to. I mean, who didn't want to do a little elective brain surgery on themselves? God damn it, second set. Don't just take over thinking without asking. She made a shocking discovery when she was investigating the restroom and communal showers. She turned one of the showers on as a lark and it worked. I mean, sure, it coughed and sputtered and then spewed out a disgustingly black filthy liquid and continued to do so for a good 15 or 20 minutes. It smelled so bad she had to leave the room for this period of time, but after that clean water issued forth. She continued to let it run for a good hour on all available fixtures. She scanned a cup full and it was cleaner than her rad water. And slightly less radioactive, too. She chuckled as she supposed Vault 108's water chip was still functional. The weirdest thing she found was a telescoping back scratcher, but she found a good use for it. She used one of the diamond wedding rings she found on the skeletons to score a half-dozen or so pieces out of the mirror in the restroom and made compact mirror squares. Then she used some Abraxo brand superglue, which somehow was still a liquid, and glued one of the mirrors to the back scratcher portion. She could use this to look around corners while keeping her squishy brain behind them. She wondered how valuable jewelry was because she found a fair bit. Some old world cash too, which she didn't even bother taking. She loaded up on everything she could carry and returned to her single occupancy room. She decided she would sleep first, then head out first thing when she woke up. She'd been up for over 8 hours and she didn't precisely know how long it would take to fight through the Garys to make it to the surface. First, though, was the most important thing. She returned to the bathroom, carefully stripped down yet kept a pistol and knife in the next stall, sitting on the soap holder, and took a long shower. The hot water, for some insane reason, worked. It had to be an electrical system, she supposed, like the endless hot water tanks she remembered from her first life. It was glorious. She used all the soap she wanted, since she already packed some and couldn't carry the rest. The only downside was there was no towels. None she was willing to use anyway, so she had to air dry like Cuba Gooding Jr. from Jerry Maguire. At least there was a wire brush she could use for her hair. Otherwise, it would be a ticket to endless tangles and then, eventually, split ends. She made her way back to her room and laid on her bed. She arrayed her ruck and other stuff so it would trip someone rushing through the door and slept with the laser pistol and knife under her pillow. She tried to go to sleep. It was slow coming, and at that moment she decided that she would reinvent the neural mesh, if only to use the induced sleep feature that allowed you to fall asleep to a fast, optimized REM cycle at user command. She fell asleep in consensus. She dreamed of attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion, of a rogue Afghani National Guard soldier shooting her friend, of gamma-ray beams glittering in the dark near the motherworld, of a blurry face, of titans scouring the life from a planet. Free at last. The woman with no name woke up feeling much more at home in her own skin. She wasn't as jittery or as wound up as she had been the previous day, even though she dreamed fitfully with nightmares on and off. It had been a traumatic day, and today didn't seem like it would end any better, but she still felt less at loose ends. It didn't take her too long to figure out why, either. While she was taking what might be her last hot shower for some time, she was, as a person is wont to do, thinking shower thoughts, TM. Specifically, she realized she lacked a name. Not that she had anyone to introduce herself to, but the lack grated. She didn't even have a designation like a cheap six might have. She thought of various possibilities and finally settled on the surname St. Clair. Dr. St. Clair, or St. Clair if she wanted to shorten the appellation in a signature. Not only did it sound rather cute, roll off the tongue nicely with her favorite vowel and are sounds that she liked, but she could affect a slight French accent. She hadn't often been in a biomorph like she was now, as her preference lay in highly advanced synthetic sleeves, but when she usually did run a hyperlinguist mod, and some of that always carried over if you ran it long enough. Or maybe a Russian one. The army sent her to language school, and she was very fluent by the time her 4 years were up. She queried second set to get her opinion on the name, but quickly realized there wasn't a second set. There wasn't a first set either. It was just her up here. She must have merged or melded or what have you while she slept. She didn't have much experience on what would happen if two egos occupied the same hardware, especially mostly baseline organic hardware, absent some specialized ghost riding hardware that was specially built to patch a second ego into the brain's sensory and speech cortexes. But even that kind of hardware was just a secondary quantum core that emulated its own neural net. Although any ego could be sleeved into these devices, it was most commonly used to house a fork from an infomorph for various reasons, often as simple as having advice or special skills while performing some mission. They weren't that common, and she had no memory of ever using one or being in one. You can't just copy one neural network and paste it on top of another. You'd get an entity that was, at best, catatonic and at worst a wildly unstable lunatic, baying at the moon, or calling random people the moon and baying at them. This was the main reason she believed neither half of her was entirely one stable neural network in the first place. They fit together too neatly and taken together. She was more the sum of her two parts now. That was suspicious. Someone or something had trimmed them, for lack of a better term, like cutting two pieces of paper together so that they slid together like a puzzle piece. Or, of course, the other possibility existed that each set of memories were artificially constructed from the start with the intent to create a stable composite. That was kind of a 6 of one and half dozen on the other sort of thing, and depended on one's metaphysical beliefs as to whether or not it was even relevant or not. She felt a little embarrassed and smug about the current state of affairs. But, of course, she knew why she was so scared in the first place. Change is, almost definitionally, scary. She was a little sad she wasn't, in fact, an incipient AGI. With bated breath, she had even considered the possibility that they might be the initial composite seed for an illegal ASI project. Who wouldn't want to be a hyperintelligence? Really? It should be a goal, not a boogeyman. Just because one group of hyperintelligences destroyed the planet doesn't mean _I_ would if I became one, she internally groused. Besides, that hadn't even happened in this universe. But she wasn't sad for too long. It's not like a person couldn't convert into an infomorph later if they had the proper hardware. So her apprehension about such topics, while not entirely gone, was mollified to a great extent. She had been a little irrationally afraid of the idea of running a full synthetic cyberbrain, for example. Because wouldn't you die if you did that? And only a copy of yourself live on? She thought about it now while wasting a prodigious amount of hot water. Well, it depended on how you did it. Beyond the metaphysical questions about a soul, if you copied your brain, then had a surgeon scoop out your actual brain and download the copy into the new cyberbrain and place it in your body, then yes, that would be a copy. That is, indeed, one option that some people who don't really care about the distinction between self and copy take too. Yesterday, the memories that would have been called second set would have been one of those people. But today, the views of the woman calling herself St. Clair were moderated. What really mattered was a continual stream of consciousness. It was the ship of Theseus question. At what point would you be dead if you replaced your brain bit by bit with synthetic equivalents? What if you did it in a single process but neuron by neuron so that you have a single stream of consciousness continually half running on part of your organic brain and half running on a computer emulating the copied neurons that was hooked inline to the parts of your brain that were copied and destroyed? That was a more complicated conversion process, but it was possible with nanomachines and a neural mesh. Before, her memories of such a process considered it needlessly complex, but today she came to appreciate why someone would have constructed such a process. To say that the memories that used to be referred to as second set might be slightly eccentric was a bit of an understatement. But in any case, she didn't think that a process like that would be death at all. Plus, if you considered a loss of consciousness death, everyone would die if they suddenly were knocked out. While someone is KO'd by a blow to the head, their brain activity is minimal until it restarts in a cascade. Certainly, most of the frontal lobe might as well be brain dead for the period of unconsciousness. Did Mike Tyson kill and replace with a copy everyone he knocked out? She shook her head while air drying. The brain wasn't a single monolith. It was hundreds of distinct modules communicating together. Consciousness was an emergent property involving all of them, and while nobody entirely understood it, it was like obscenity. You knew it when you saw it. She wrung out most of the water from her hair as carefully as she could. It was long, reaching down to her butt, and she knew it was going to be a hassle to keep up with. Not only would taking care of it be difficult without a steady supply of shampoo, conditioner, or at bare minimum soap, but it would also produce certain tactical disadvantages when any raider could yank on it in a fight. Drying it now without a towel was also quite a pain. After brushing it sufficiently, she managed to fold it into something like a bun. Using 2 ceramic composite chopsticks she found in one of the rooms that had passed the test of time to hold it in place. Her riot helmet was big enough that the bun wasn't even in the way. That would work for now. She would just have to work to ensure no enemies snuck up on her or gave her time to put her hair up before engaging in melee. She suited up. She was carrying about 30 kilos of gear, food, and water, and that wasn't including her weapons and carbine. She had a holster on each side of her hip, set in a cross draw with the 10mm pistol in one, with its entire magazine being hollow points, and the laser pistol in the other. She had affixed her knife to part of the combat armor in a pull-down sheath on her left breast. Considering her bodysuit was a light gray in color, she was reminded of the boss from Metal Gear Solid, Snake Eater. Well, a younger-looking Barbie version of the boss, perhaps. In any case, in her opinion, it looked very tactical. Maybe she would intimidate someone who didn't know she had no idea what to do with a knife beyond the pointy end went into the bad guy. But honestly, that technique has worked for her so far. She managed to clip her messenger bag onto the mall bag, so she wouldn't be carrying it over her shoulder as she had been. It was still somewhat in reach in a pinch and held all of her medical supplies except for one stim-pack in one of the pockets on her leg. She had decided to use the pistol primarily today. The laser pistol offered, in theory, more damage potential and penetration. Still, she felt that the hydrostatic shock from a 10mm hollow point round would be more immediately disabling to clones that did not wear any armor, especially when you consider the laser tended to cauterize and not lacerate arteries. The carbine would carried on a sling just in case. Leaving the area without another look, she returned to the barricade she squeezed through the other day. Pausing to think, she considered that she would prefer to leave the barricade, or at least the appearance of one, in place even when leaving today. There were still many valuable things she was leaving behind, after all. She didn't want the Garys to find her stash of fancy lad cakes, for example, even if, after 200 years, they tasted more like a lad's ass. Twisting one of the filing cabinets around, she took out all the drawers to remove weight and give her rope something to tie on. After getting ready, she opened the door and peered around each corner with her pistol. No Garys in sight. That was good. She threw her ruck through the door and followed it quickly behind. She pulled the filing cabinet back vertically with the rope and then quickly reclaimed her rope from the simple slip knot she used and coiled it back up. She loved it when a plan came together. Now, if she recalled correctly, she should go left from here to make her way out of the vault. But it didn't matter too much because the explorable area of this vault wasn't extensive, and the only hazards were Garys. Not that she wanted to see any of them, but she was less worried about them today than she was yesterday. She set off at a quiet sneak, intending to continue leveling that skill as much as possible. An enemy you do not have to fight or who doesn't see you coming when you do is not a threat. The first thing she noticed was while there was blood pooling around the area where she beakered the first Gary that there were no bodies. She had been wondering how, precisely, the cloning facility below levels had the biomass to continually create Garys. Maybe they were recycled? Did the Garys have enough mental acuity to know to bring dead Garys or victims somewhere to recycle them? Questions. She found her first Gary not too far past the room she arrived in the vault inside. She saw him using her back-scratching mirror in one of the few 90-degree corners that didn't involve a closed door. He was meandering slowly away from her, carrying a lead pipe. If he had a gun or a knife, she would have plugged him, but a lead pipe was a much lower risk now that she actually had some ballistic protection, especially on her arms. She quietly holstered her pistol and sighed internally while sneaking up on him. Was she being stupid here? It wasn't so much that she wanted to save bullets, but she wanted to hold off possibly alerting the nascent Gary Gestalt as long as possible. Loud noises seemed to attract them like xenomorphs. She couldn't help but think she probably looked cool as she slid her knife out of the sheath as she neared him. Now, she didn't have any experience doing some sort of Sam Fisher-style stealthy takedown, but her medical knowledge indicated that a person's body, even vulnerable areas like their throat, are actually more substantial than you'd think. So if you wanted to be sure to get the job done the first time when cutting a homicidal clone's throat from behind, you ought to use more force than you think you'd need. So that was precisely what she did. She didn't try to do some grab them by the mouth while cutting their throat move. She thought she'd probably fuck that up. Instead, she just reached around with the knife and, she jumped back to avoid getting Gary blood all over her hands. She glanced down at the dying clone. The noises and twitching he was doing was making her queasy again. Hopefully, she wouldn't ever get to the point where she felt nothing when she killed something that at least approximated humanity. Cleaning her knife, she replaced it and quickly brought out her scanner. Would she regret doing this? Well, it is for the science. She briefly scanned Gary but spent most of the time on the head, getting multiple scans from different angles. She didn't have the time to really study the scans behind enemy lines as it were, but she took a glance at the brain scans, briefly panning, tilting and zooming the 3D image to take a brief glance at a number of important brain structures. She considered the anomalous areas depicted while she searched an empty room for easily carted-off loot. The prefrontal cortex looked atrophied. That was a complex area of the brain. Even her knowledge wasn't entirely complete. It was a still-studied area of the brain even for transhumanity and contained a lot of emergent processes. But, for sure, it served various functions, including decision-making, planning, the expression of personality, and controlling social behavior. She would have liked to settle the case right there. The Garys are crazy, the end. However, she wasn't entirely sure. The brain was a fascinating organ. The flat baseline brain most humans had was a use it or lose it type of organ. For example, consider people who were born blind or became blind through trauma. After a while of not utilizing their optical and sensory cortex areas for sight for a prolonged period, the brain will reorganize these areas, usually offloading input from other senses into them. That is why blind people are said to have such fantastic hearing and sense of smell, for example. But that wasn't a function of trauma. You could force the brain to do the same thing if you wore an eye patch for months or a year. Ooh, a stealth boy. Nobody will tell her that opening all lockers is a bad idea. She will have to stop herself from randomly rummaging through people's drawers when she finds a settlement. She will definitely scan that before using it. Wasn't it supposed to make you crazy if you used a lot? She'd definitely like to study that process, but not on her own brain. She stuffed the stealth boy into a pocket on her messenger bag and continued sneaking slowly down the hallway in the direction, she hoped, of freedom. What was she thinking about? Oh yeah. In any case, the changes to the dead Gary's prefrontal cortex reminded her a little of the brain scans of the visual cortex she saw in blind flats in textbooks. She'd never seen an actual blind person who wasn't trying to intentionally create some sort of blind sight neural network as a lark before. The closest thing to blind people she has experienced with are people who could only see Roy G. Biv when they saw a rainbow. How can people live with not seeing at least infrared and UV? Honestly, she was used to having synthetic aperture radar mapped to her visual cortex. The truly bizarre areas of the brain she saw on Gary were parts of the visual cortex and almost the entirety of the Broca region. Shit looked like you were trying to make hard-boiled eggs but only had scrambled eggs to start with. If he saw anything at all, she was pretty sure it was psychedelic as hell. And the Broca region was the region responsible for language. If he ever had understood a language before, he sure as fuck didn't now. Taken all together, she got the initial picture of the clones as people unable to ever understand language and who have been feral for so long that their actual decision-making and social areas of the brain had atrophied and been reorganized. So what did Gary see? She wondered. Perhaps he only saw other Garys as humans and everyone else as monsters. Great, now she felt sorry for them. She shouldn't have looked. Opening a door, she found another Gary, and luck kept being on her side because he wasn't facing her this time either. He was armed with double-barreled shotgun, though, which gave her some pause. She definitely isn't gonna try for a knife takedown with this fucker, but she would like to keep the noise down. She slid her pistol back in her holster and unholstered the laser pistol. Normally she wouldn't aim for a headshot, but at this distance with a Gary mostly in torpor she would try. She carefully lined up a shot on the back of his head and carefully squeezed the trigger. A soft crack, a bright beam of red light sizzling through hair before briefly punching through the front of the Gary's head, him flopping bonelessly on the ground. Fuck, had she gotten total burn through on a single shot? These lasers were really hazardous. It punched a hole through his head the size of a dime, and it smelled like someone left some chicken on the barbecue too long. She groaned and walked over, holstering her pistol and reaching down to take a look at the shotgun when simultaneously felt someone punch her in the back and heard several earth-shatteringly loud bangs behind her, followed by an angry-sounding repeated yell of, "Gary! Gary!" Fuck, how had one gotten behind her? She kept the shotgun in her hand and tumbled forward over the dead Gary. She hoped to look graceful like a cat, but she suspected it was more surprised derp. She came to her feet as she heard a couple more shots and felt a sting in her neck. Had this fuck shot her in the neck? That was like the only unarmored area on her body. She felt for it while she ran and concluded she took a scrape from a round hitting the wall, fragmenting and ricocheting. Limbs flailing in a sprint, she made a 90-degree turn to a branching corridor to break line of sight. She was confronted with the sight of a Gary rushing her swinging what she would label as an overly ornate walking stick with either a solid gold or gold-plated eagle on top that he was trying to brain her with. Other people might refer to it as a fucking pimp cane, though. Skidding to a halt and ducking under the first swing, she brought the sawed-off shotty up to bear and briefly hoped dead Gary actually fucking loaded it before giving Pimp Gary one barrel straight to the side of the head. Shaking her ringing ears, she definitely wouldn't be getting a brain scan of Pimp Gary. The cane was spared, though. She was taking that fucking thing. She turned around and crouched just as ass-shooting Gary turned the corner, and she gave him what for with the other barrel. It didn't put him down, so she surmised it must have been birdshot in that barrel, but it did pepper him up nicely, including the face, which made it a lot more challenging for him to aim at her. She immediately dropped the shotgun, unholstered her pistol, and put a single-aim shot directly in center mass while he groaned and seemed in a lot of pain, which dropped the ass blaster. Panting, she flicked the light on her Pip-Boy on and swung around 180 degrees, shining the bright beam of light down the hallway. Then she ran back the way she came and shined the light down the hallway where she had lasered Shoddy Gary. She dumped her ruck on the floor and grabbed the back scratcher to use the mirror to check on her neck. It was barely bleeding. That was quite lucky. If injured too severely, her medicines induce a medical coma while trying to keep the brain oxygenated while healing the wound. It's quite a beneficial play-dead mechanic here in the Fallout universe everywhere except places where clones feed dead people into a mulcher to make more clones. She glanced down at what ass blaster Gary was shooting at her. Holstering her pistol, she picked it up. It looked like some sort of carbine, but different from the M4-style one she hadn't used at all in this engagement. She worked the magazine release and glanced down inside. Ah, this is the legendary pistol caliber carbine. It used the same pistol ammo she had in her sidearm, but the much longer barrel offered much increased ballistics. She put it aside for the moment before reaching back and touching her ass. She was bleeding, but barely. She felt 2 impacts. She could feel one bullet mushroomed into the fabric of her left cheek while her right cheek was what was injured. Fuck. Was he aiming at her butt? Walking kind of stung, which didn't make a hike in the desert look too appealing. She glanced at the back of her ruck, ensuring it hadn't taken a round. If Ass Blaster had killed her fish cakes, she'd be even more pissed, but she couldn't find any impacts or holes. She began policing up the scene of the crime. The pimp cane slid easily into the hole of one of the extra-large carabiners on her maul bag, the gaudy gold eagle catching it in place. The shoddy and spare pistol she shoved inside, and she carried the pistol caliber carbine after reloading its magazine. This weapon actually had an ACOG-style red dot sight that, for some fucking reason, still worked. Did they power everything with radiation here? Once she got to someplace safe, she planned to put that on her M4, which was just iron sights. As she finished collecting all the loot, a Gary carrying a lead pipe came running from the path she had initially taken. She took careful aim and shot him twice in the chest. After that, she didn't even bother to search his body. instead turning around and proceeding with prudent haste down the path she hadn't explored. She would see about extracting the bullet from her, but if she found the exit or a defensible room, her medic hinds wouldn't entirely heal a wound with a foreign object still inside. If they couldn't dislodge it themselves, she would definitely have to help them along. Turning a corner, she brought the carbine up from its ready position and popped Gary in the head on reflex. Wait, was that a fucking sword? She studied his armament, but all it was a cracked, chipped costume katana you'd spend $100 on at eBay. The edge wasn't sharp, nor was the tip. She left it. She kept moving, finding another stealth boy and, more interestingly, a complete toolbox with many miscellaneous hand tools like screwdrivers, pliers, etc. She wasn't leaving that, even if she was starting to think she was carrying a full load. It must be close to 45 kilos of shit by now. She secured the toolbox with rope to her maul bag and continued on her way. She had been noticing large, dangerous-looking generators that arced sparks of electricity from weird Tesla coil-looking apparatuses on the top. She tried to give them a wide berth. Finally, after opening a door, she was greeted with the sight of the gaping maw of an open vault door, and she almost cried in relief. But she saw one last Gary dragging a dead body into the vault. He didn't even notice her, and she put one careful shot into his head. He had an unloaded revolver and no ammo, and the dead Wastelander had some bottle caps, a paper map, and some jury-rigged homemade pipe rifle. It took the same 5mm or so ammo as her M4, so she took the 50 or so rounds, carefully laid the homemade piece of garbage against the wall, and used the heel of her boot to crack it into 2 parts. She wasn't going to carry that heavy useless fucking thing, but she wasn't going to leave it for the Garys in case it did work. She didn't entirely run out into the sunlight because she was a little worried about possible raiders, death claws and other monsters, but she proceeded with prudent haste into the light of full day. She felt herself sniffling and tears running down her face as she looked up at the sky, after ensuring there were no threats in the immediate vicinity. This was emotional for multiple reasons for her. Not only was she out of that hellhole, but a full half of her memories had not been on the dirt of planet Earth since the Titan AIs had forced everyone who wasn't a brain-controlled puppet off the planet, killed everyone who remained. She reached down, grabbed a handful of dirt between her fingers, and just sniffled at it for a moment, feeling it fall through her fingers. A handful of genuine old Terra dirt, alive with its microbiome, could be sold on Habitat for enough to buy a top-end biomorph body. Everyone was nostalgic about Earth, especially those who had lived through the fall. She used to have a penny that must have been in someone's pocket when they fled. She made it into a pendant, and it was one of the most valuable things she owned. This desert wasn't also that different from the desert of New Mexico, where her grandpa took her camping in state parks. She couldn't remember his face, but he had passed away while she was deployed overseas for the first time. The fact that the land around the former nation's capital looked like a New Mexico desert wasn't that great of a sign, though. She glanced up at the sky again, gauging the sun's position. It was close to directly overhead, which meant it was close to or just after noon. Glancing around, she found a regular, everyday stick and shoved it into the ground, straight up. Then, she used a different stick to mark the position of the shadow the stick was casting. She found a place to sit down for a moment and got her medical supplies ready. It took some work, but she managed to use the mirror, a position that looked more at home playing Twister and forceps to prise a bullet out of her ass cheek. It hadn't even penetrated more than halfway through. Did that mean she was thick with 2 C's? She ensured there was no foreign debris in the wound before putting a bandage on it, and her clothes back on. She ate 2 whole fancy lad cakes and an entire liter of water. She would try to keep the water in her camelback for the hike, so she didn't have to keep stopping and starting to get a drink. Laying both of her rifles on the ground, she took out some tools from the toolbox and transferred the red dot sight onto the M4 style carbine. Then she used maybe 15 minutes and 5 rounds of ammo to zero the sight to 100 meters, or the closest approximation of that she could come to without some kind of rangefinder. She stowed the pistol carbine with the rest of the gear, tied on top of her ruck, and got everything back together. Returning to the stick, she marked the position of the stick's shadow again, and then drew a straight line through both marks. That would be a west-east line. The first shadow mark is always west, so she turned to the north. She looked at the map from the dead Wastelander. How convenient. It had Canterbury Commons, this vault, and Rivet City Way in the bottom marked. Not Megaton, though, but she was more or less sure it was around this area west of the river. She was pretty sure Pip-Boys not only had compasses built in but some sort of freaking GPS, so it was a shame she couldn't use hers right now. Was this map placed here by the mysterious ways of ROB? She didn't know how standard maps of the Wasteland were. Well, whatever. She began her trek north. She started seeing landmarks about 4 hours later when the evening sun started its slow trek towards setting, and a little while later she found signs of people. She wasn't challenged, despite the fact that she must look like a hardened spec ops operator, in her mind at least, until she walked into a diner across the street from what appeared to be a fire station. She was polite enough to sling her rifle before entering, though. The few people inside still looked at her suspiciously, though at first, until she took off her riot helmet and shook out her hair from its bun. Then, with the sight of the doctor's well-shampooed tresses and Colgate smile, they opened up a little. One well-weathered man smiled at her and said, "Well, howdy, stranger. You certainly look like you've seen better days. I'm Lewis, and this little one is my son Derek." A lady's pulchritude. The doctor didn't know whether to be offended by that statement or not, because she was sure she looked at least as fabulous as one could look while they had been hiking for a half-day in the wilderness. Oh wait, her neck still had dried blood all over it. She didn't even bother putting a bandage on, the cut was so small. She decided on a slight French accent, although she didn't push it to the extreme. Instead, she tended to ignore H sounds and pronounce both R and W sounds similarly, used a TH sound for S, Z, and F, and utilized a more upwards tilting intonation pattern. She thought it sounded subdued yet cute. There was a reason beyond sounding cute, though. She wanted to imply without saying specifically to people who would be wondering why she was so accomplished in so many fields that she was a pre-war scientist that had been in stasis for hundreds of years. Wasn't that the plot of Fallout 4? She couldn't remember anything about it, but she simpered for her audience. "Ah yes, I suppose I have. No? I can't rightly say how I found myself in the middle of a band of lunatics, but they shot me in the how do you say derriere twice. I highly recommend anyone who does not wish to engage in the mortal combats with homicidal clones to avoid vault number 108, about 15 kilometers south of here. I am forgetting my manners. I am Lilliane St. Clair, doctor of medicine by trade, scientist by vocation, and sadly most recently warrior by sad necessity. And it is a pleasure to meet you and your son, monsieur, and I would be pleased if you would call me Lily." She did feel kinda grimy already, though. One of the standard biomods to sylph-class biomorphs, beyond the elfin or fey aesthetic and optimized pheromones for near-universal appeal, was the clean metabolism mod. She was positive she knew how it worked. It was a small genome change combined with specialized nanomachines. With it, a sylph could exercise until sweat and grime would have been covering them entirely, and not only would they not smell at all, but their sweat excretions generally provided a self-cleaning effect for their skin rather than the opposite in her case. That might be her first real mod, if she could get her hands on whatever the Fallout equivalent of a simple gene editing system. She studied such technologies like CRISPR-Cas9 in history, but in practice, transhumanity had gone way past that. But CRISPR, or whatever the local universe equivalent, was very, very simple. You could buy CRISPR kits on eBay in her past life and follow a simple step-by-step guide to add the trait of bioluminescence to simple organisms like molds or algae as a fun science experiment. Although, of course, if she couldn't find anything anywhere, she would have to return to the bowels of Vault 108. She definitely wanted either power armor or a team or both before she braved it. The man called Lewis looked shocked. "You escaped from that charnel house? Every so often, we have people come looking for it to scavenge pre-war tech inside, but we rarely hear from them again. Are you okay? As places to get shot go, well, that's not the worst. You're lucky to be alive, miss. No, Dr. Lily. Don't see too many doctors round here, neither. Not to be rude, but you look more like a soldier than a doctor." He says the last bit a bit suspiciously. Lily chuckles softly and says in a way that makes it obvious she is quoting someone, "My poor body, sir, requires it. I am driven on by the flesh, and she must needs go that the devil drives. In other words, I would most prefer to wear the lab coat somewhere and see to the ills of the world in my research, but I am more likely to survive longer like this, at least for now, when one finds oneself alone and bereft in a dangerous world." Lewis tilted his head and then nodded slightly. "I reckon I know what you mean, ma'am. Would you care to take a seat? I'll buy you a glass of water." This man was not familiar with me at all, But his son is the spitting image of one of the NPCs in this town with the same name, except instead of an annoying teenager, he looks more like an annoying cheeky brat. Was she multiple years before the start of the plot of the game? That would be both good and bad. She wasn't that interested in the plot of the game. Her main interest was survival and research of new technology. However, she indeed approved of the Vault Dweller's father and the Brother of Steel's quest to provide limitless fresh water to the capital Wasteland. She was a hypermaterialist, and the more people alive meant more people working to advance society forward and a more significant number of geniuses alive, propelling technology and society much faster too. Transhumanity had over 40 billion sapients living on planet Earth before the fall. By the time of her last memories, 10 times that lived in various habitats and O'Neill cylinders across the solar system. So all of her memories were in accord that the more people alive were to the better. Yes, I would appreciate that. And if this establishment sells any food that is better than fancy lad cakes and scavenged military rations, I'd very much like to buy some, too. I have some of the bottle caps, yes? If not, I have other things to trade, she said as she sat her rucksack down on the ground and slid into one of the booths, although she did select the booth that had a clear line of sight both to the door and the main windows of the diner, something she thought Mr. Lewis definitely noticed. The cheeky brat stepped up to her booth and said bluntly, "You talk funny, lady." His dad smacked him upside the head for that, which made her giggle. Yes, but what if the truth is that you talk funny? Perhaps everywhere else people talk like me. No. The kid rubbed the back of his head before shaking it firmly. No way. I once talked to a trader from Rivet City, and that is like across the world. His dad chuckled slightly. Yes, sorry about Derek. He doesn't mean anything by it. I'm pretty sure they're serving some grilled kebabs today. Not sure what the meat is from, but it is seasoned enough that you don't really care. Cheap too, only a couple caps. Her mouth started watering. She didn't even care if it was a rat. So long as it wasn't grilled Gary kebabs, she would eat it. She turned to the proprietor. Yes, I would like 3 kebabs, please. She pulled the required caps out of her pocket, as she was sure this was cash on the barrelhead sort of establishment, and they wouldn't extend a strange drifter woman who talked funny any credit. Looking down at the caps, she started to understand why they were used as an ad hoc currency. Really, the only thing money needed was to be scarce and for multiple people to agree to use it as a medium of exchange. These bottle caps were quite strange. She would scan them later but felt that they were an organometallic-based metal alloy, perhaps, and they had embedded within them with tiny sparkles. Grown crystals? They would undoubtedly be difficult to counterfeit, and she could see trade continuing this way until someone got the Nuka-Cola bottling factory up and running again. She drained the glass of water in one long gulp. What would she drink with her delicious hot kebabs? She dug out the Nuka-Cola Quantum she found in Vault 108. She had already examined it and was curious why it was slightly radioactive before being opened. Still, the label proclaimed it to have twice the calories, twice the carbohydrates, twice the caffeine, and twice the taste. That was a bold claim that she would test. It also appeared to have at least twice the strontium, too. It was a shame she couldn't chill it, but she couldn't have everything. She glanced up at Lewis. Please take a seat. Your son, too. They did so. She dug out a regular Nuka-Cola and handed it to the brat, who yelled, "Thanks, lady." His father elbowed him and whispered, "She's a doctor," to which he regarded her, nodded and said, "Thanks, Dr. Lady." Lewis groaned but shrugged. At least he said thank you. So, Doc St. Clair, what kind of doctor are you? Do you plan to stick around town long? We ain't had a town doctor in some time. Excepting when one comes through traveling with the merchant caravans. Lily's eyes tracked the plate of kebabs from when they came from the kitchen to her table like prey. They were prey, her prey. She decided to eat one right away, so he held up her finger to indicate she would reply in a moment before chomping down on the meat. One bit at a time. It was seasoned quite well, a little spicy. The taste, she couldn't quite identify, but it was surprisingly tender. She might save a bit to scan, but then again that might ruin it for her. She took a swig of Quantum. Wow, that is tasty. Then she turned back to the man, general medicine, to include surgery, although it is not as though we have many operating theaters these days, so I generally have to limit myself to emergency surgeries, and minor ones out here. My research, though, is in genetics and human augmentation, like, for example, with the right equipment, I could fashion a robotic prosthesis for a person who had lost his or her arm in an accident or similar situation. Lily didn't plan on hiding her skills. However, she did plan on understating them at first, and especially understating how precisely in favor of augmentation she was for otherwise healthy flats. The brat's eyes widened. Wow, you can give me a robot arm? Like Dr. Robot Ron? Yes, she liked the cheeky little brat's moxie. Yes, she could, little boy. Why don't you come with me in my white van so I can? She shook away the thought. Ha ha ha, of course, she was being ridiculous. She wouldn't just give any kid free robot arms. They had to pay for them. Lewis smacked him upside the head again. There's nothing wrong with your regular arm. She is talking about people who've had their arm chopped off in accidents or by raiders. Sorry, document. With a speciality like that, I can't see how you'd be sticking around town for too long. I wouldn't be surprised if you weren't headed for Rivet City, or heck, even the Brotherhood of Steel at the Citadel. She blinked, tilting her head to one side. She was pretty sure that once she made a name for herself, organizations would find Mr. Lewis and quiz him about her, so she decided to slightly play up the possibility she might be from the pre-war time period. The Citadel? Isn't that the military college in South Carolina? Is that still running? Isn't that pretty far away? And could you tell me a little about this Brotherhood of Steel? I assume they're more than a fraternity? Lewis blinked. You must really not be from around here. I won't really comment about that, it ain't really my place, but perhaps I should give you a brief rundown on a few groups like that. You'd be kind of bringing attention to yourself if you don't know who some of them are. But firstly, the Citadel is what they call the ruins of that giant five-sided building in the heart of the ruins of DC. The Brotherhood of Steel operate out of there as a base. Lily nodded her head. I understand. The Pentagon, now called the Citadel. Got it. Lewis began to give her a quick and dirty briefing on the larger settlements and prominent players in the capital Wasteland while she ate her kebabs. She knew most of it, but she wanted confirmation that she wasn't in some alternate universe or something. She even got him to mark points on her paper map, including Megaton, the Pentagon, and a couple of small settlements. He recommended she stay far away from downtown DC, as he called it a war zone, mostly. That made her tentative destination of the VSS building problematic, as it was on the western edges of what he called a war zone. Well, she didn't know precisely what the date was, but if the cheeky brat was anything to judge, and the fact that nobody had mentioned the mechanist or antagonizer, she had some time before she ran into the plot. She still wasn't sure what she planned to do about that can of worms, beyond help as she could, but she had time enough to get set up in Megaton before hitting the VSS building. Of the combat mods she could probably build and install in herself in just a few months was perhaps limited to light bioweave armor under her skin, a neural mesh if she could make a proper fabricator by reprogramming her metachines, basic reflex enhancements, and possibly an adrenaline control module which would let her trigger at will a hefty dose of fight or flight chemicals. It was considered in the same family as the reflex augments, and it was obsolete but easy to build. The user would notice time slow down for perhaps half a minute but would be jittery for a time after that. He was recommending she should stay away from the Enclave when their discussion was interrupted by several gunshots outside. The pistol started to clear her holster as her eyes immediately tracked a squad of some obviously Mad Max rejects split up, the majority running towards the fire station across the street, while two burst through the door. They all had pushed up from the booth simultaneously. She was keeping her pistol at her side, and hidden a bit behind Lewis. Maybe they just wanted to rob the place. The taller one, who had an honest-to-God mohawk, guffawed. Whoa, look at the tits on that one. Kill the old man. I'll pop the kid. And her bodysuit was form-fitting, but she was wearing armor over it. Plus, didn't they see all of her weapons? Her pistol was rising in their direction as soon as he said the word kill, but when the first one said his target was the kid, her aim point shifted to him imperceptibly. Lewis was, surprisingly, not armed. He yelled out, "No," and leaped to put himself in between the two men and his son. Lily fired first, and she thought the gunshot surprised the second guy into jerking the trigger of his improvised pipe gun, letting off a round that struck Lewis directly in the chest, who crumpled to the ground. Lily's target's brains were splattered against the diner door with enough force that a bit of skull struck the bell that was kept tied to the door to announce new arrivals hard enough to give an audible ringing sound. She shifted to fire 3 rounds at the second guy, all hitting center mass, putting him on the floor. Little Derek screamed, "Dad, no," and went down on his knees to grab his dad's arm, who had started coughing up a fair bit of blood. "Don't worry, Dee. I have a stim pack in my pocket. Just a sec. Lily kneeled down and stopped him from reaching for it. Stop, don't. If you use that stim pack, you will die. Derek, go grab that camouflage bag from my backpack. Please. All Derek heard was that his father was going to die and was inconsolable. You have to save him, Dr. Lady. You have to. Go grab my bag. Please, she repeated, and he was off to comply. Lily sighed, seeing the confused expression on the man's bloody face. The bullet wasn't a through and through, and judging by the fact that you're coughing up blood, it either penetrated or deeply bruised the lobe of your lung and probably lodged partly inside it. If you use that stim pack with a bullet lodged in the lobe of your lung, you'll die of a pulmonary embolism within a day. If it is in your lung, you will likely die of pneumonia in a couple of weeks. Have to get it out, then you can use the stim. It isn't magic, you know. A look of comprehension came over his face and he nodded. Derek returned with her messenger bag. She glanced down at him. What do you know about guns, kid? He looked up at her. They are always loaded. Never pointed at something you don't want to destroy, and keep my finger off the trigger until I'm ready to fire. Lily clucked her tongue. Good enough. She slung her carbine off her back, turned the safety off and handed it to the boy. The safety's off. I want you to go behind the counter and cover the entrance. If someone you don't recognize walks through that door carrying a gun, shoot them 3 times. I will be a bit distracted keeping your dad alive for the next few minutes. Can you do that for me, Dr. Robotron? The boy got a severe and determined look on his face before he nodded, taking the rifle and running back behind the counter to use it as cover. Lily nodded and sat down, fishing for some forceps and hemostats out of her bag. She also pulled out her scanner. While she was very confident in her diagnosis, the real-time imaging of where the bullet was would make this a lot easier. Lewis was groaning a bit and spitting blood every few seconds. She suspected a severe bruising of the lobe rather than an outright penetration. All right, this is going to hurt, so just try to stay conscious. As soon as I get the bullet out, we can administer the stim pack. He nodded without saying anything. It didn't take her that long at all to fish the bullet out, especially watching the forceps dig for it with the scanner. She pulled it out, dropped it on Lewis's chest, reached into his pocket for the stim pack and carefully administered it intravenously rather than intramuscularly. It was slightly more effective when administered this way, and plus it cleared out plaque in arteries and slightly rejuvenated his heart, which always tended to be the first thing to go in old active men. She watched her scanner in fascination as the medicine slowly over time regenerated the lung, even absorbing the blood that was pooled in the lobe back into the arteries and destroying the clot that was in the process of forming. She didn't stop watching even as the entry wound started to knit shut. Finally, she blinked and shoved the scanner away. Looks like you'll live, Lewis. Hey, Dr. Robotron, come gimme my rifle, please. Hours later, a much better Lewis and Derek had parted ways with the visiting doctor, and they were checking up on Lewis's brother, who was the main target of the attack. The raiders were eliminated rather quickly by the guards at the merchant's transshipping area. Lewis was snickering, trying to hold off a full guffaw. Derek, tell your uncle about why you said Dr. St. Clair shot the men first. Derek nodded and said, well, when the 2 bad men came in the diner, they said something about the doctor's, well, I'd rather not repeat it, but like many a tween boy, as soon as he heard the word tit, he didn't hear the rest of the sentence where his and his father's life was threatened. His uncle blinked. She shot them because they said something uncomplimentary? Not that he cared, in fact. They were murderers who should have been shot on sight as far as he was concerned. But it was a bit odd. Derek shook his head. It was complimentary, but, Dad always told me that there are times to remark on a lady's pulchritude, and then there are times when you ought just to stay silent. That man, he should have just shut up. But, since his friend shot my dad, I'm glad he didn't. Clinic rounds. Lily was asked to treat several guards that had been injured while repelling the raider attack. The mayor of the small town, apparently Dr. Robotron's uncle, had provided some stim packs as a bonus for the successful defense. But one of the guards had a completely shattered femur. Apparently, he had taken a round from a high-powered rifle, at least 30-06 or whatever the local equivalent was. The guard had used a stim pack in a trauma situation, which was good, because Lily suspected the shot had definitely shredded the man's femoral artery. Her work was a follow-up surgery to ensure that the man's leg wouldn't remain disabled for life, and involved removing bone shards from the leg and realigning the regrown bone. Sadly for him, she had to carefully fracture his femur in 3 places to accomplish that. Still, at least there was some sort of narcotic derived from what she suspected was mutated poppy flowers that were available for sedation. She just had to titrate the narcotic delivery to avoid him actually stopping breathing, as mechanically ventilating him would be a bit complicated. She would have to secure a stable supply of such drugs, but they seemed to be both in short supply and also in great demand. It wasn't like there was any kind of drug enforcement agency, and honestly, she couldn't blame someone for wanting to get high in an apocalypse. But she used almost the entire supply that was on hand for 2 operations. She had set up a temporary clinic these last 2 days. Both Louis and his brother, the mayor, offered the use of a clean building and a couple of helpers if she would offer a reasonable fee for diagnostic consultations for anyone in the settlement, and upfront costs or trade when an identified problem could be fixed. She had seen about 50 patients in these past 2 days. Mostly she offered advice for managing chronic conditions. She thought it was very good advice, too, but there were a couple of cases where either the drugs were available, or she could fake it by quickly and discreetly reprogramming a small number of her own medicines to provide subtle but miraculous effects. For example, hopefully her current patient, a father of one of the more well-to-do local families, she had diagnosed him with Alzheimer's. 100 bottle caps was hers if she could cure him. She didn't accept payment for attempts either. Her pride would only allow her to take money for success, unlike the medical system she recalled in America. His son was anxious, which she always thought was both endearing and useless. Can you really cure him, Dr. St. Clair? She clucked her tongue. Possibly. I will try. You won't owe me anything unless he sees significant cognitive improvement. Alzheimer's was a degenerative brain disease where proteins would misfold in the brain, causing mechanical malfunctions. It was also progressively degenerative, in that the rate of decline accelerated over time. It was because when a protein misfolded, others around it might crystallize and misfold to match. The disease progressed almost like an infection as mental decline became exponential as the 3-dimensional surface area of misfolded areas increased. However, it was simple to program a small number of medicines to travel to the patient's brain, detect the misfolded proteins, and correct them. Strictly speaking, it wasn't a cure because this was a congenital condition. It would take targeted gene therapy to eliminate the expressions in a patient's genome to actually cure it, but it was a treatment. It would restart the clock from 0, so it would probably take several decades to get to the point of cognitive decline again, and considering the age of her patient and projected future lifespan, that was as good as a cure, she thought. And unlike some other degenerative brain diseases, Alzheimer's didn't do permanent lossy damage to the brain structures either. If the folds were corrected, the patient would make a full recovery, including all memories. She considered her sedation options as she typed away, programming a medicine therapy. The teenaged girl provided as her assistant wasn't that useful, except when she had to hide away like this. The girl who seemed devoted to her wouldn't let someone disturb her. In the long term for sedation, she could devise a central nervous system blocking device. Such things were pretty common, but it wasn't as though she had the blueprints to one inside her head. She just sort of understood the principles of their operation. It might be possible to use medicines, but she wouldn't be able to provide more than one concurrent programming schema for medicines in the same person's body very easily if they didn't have a nanohive themselves, and she was already using a very minute amount on each person she operated on to stave off infection. Without a hive of their own, the implanted medicines would generally stay near the site of implantation, which was whatever incision site she made. Still, even a microgram of them would be enough to stave off infection before they became inactive after several days. She had already programmed her hive to enter continuous production. It usually tried to maintain a specific medicine population and only had to ramp up production when they were utilized to repair damage, but there was no actual harm in her running 100 or even 1,000 times the normal amount. They were programmed not to interfere in bodily functions after all. Her nanohive implant could only manufacture about 2 grams worth of medicines a day, and essentially every one of her long-term plans had uses for them. Perhaps she was focusing too much on the technological solutions to this problem. That was a problem for her both as an electrical engineer in the past and as a doctor. She had used drugs in these operations but wanted something else because the drugs were scarce. That didn't precisely mean that drugs weren't a solution. Manufacture her own? It couldn't be a traditional narcotic, then. because the challenges of cultivating poppies, mutated or not, were numerous. Also, if she cultivated poppy plants in a greenhouse, she would have to hire people to tend them, and then hire people to provide security, as they were obviously a stealable item that already had a lot of demand in what she assumed was the private recreational market. Even if she was growing them for her own use, she had no doubt she'd end up running up against cartels or whatever the equivalent was in the Wasteland just for being incidentally in a similar line of business. Tapping her finger on her desk, her mind wandered to watching a film with Brad Pitt from the 90s, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Yes, that could work. When you compared it to CNS blocking technology, it was practically hitting the patient in the head with a rock, but it would be effective. Devil ether. She giggled as she remembered the film. The only thing that really worried me was the ether. There is nothing in the world more helpless and irresponsible and depraved than a man in the depths of an ether binge. Her medical experience was telling her that this was wildly exaggerated for theatrical effect, but ether was one of the first effective sedatives. It lost its popularity due to its many downsides, mostly involving its flammability and tendency to explode, but also the fact that dosing could be more of an art and not as exact as modern medicine would prefer. Still, it was dead simple to make and only used readily available chemicals, namely ethanol and sulfuric acid. She would likely have to build her own small industrial still to create the ethanol in the required purity. Still, she honestly needed a fair supply of ethanol for antiseptic purposes anyway. Her memories of living in space habitats didn't help her too much in the construction of such pedestrian things as distillation apparatuses. But her memories of being an undergraduate in an engineering university very much did. Oh, she could definitely build a still. Copper tubing wouldn't even be that difficult to acquire with all the Wasteland scrap refrigerators and HVAC systems sitting around going to rust. This was also something she could teach others to make so long as proper safety precautions were taken. Plus, some of the excess ethanol could be diverted as a saleable trade good. If she planned on living for a time in Megaton, she should probably get on the good side of that criminal Moriarty running one of the few good bars. Honestly, she wouldn't even care if he tried to take over the operation, as he might be wont to do, so long as she was minimally compensated and got her ethanol on time. Until Project Purity came online years from now, she would also need stills to create distilled water, especially if she wanted to make her own saline. How many employees would she have to have on the periphery just to have an absolute minimum level of acceptable clinic? Running this temporary clinic had been an eye-opener. She came out of her office with a small 5 cubic centimeters syringe. Alice, I've finished formulating the treatment. Will you bring the patient and his son back into the exam room? Sterilizing medical equipment was also becoming a chore. She was reusing a lot of equipment and devices that were designed to be single-use throwaway items like syringes. It wasn't like anyone had any autoclaves either. The girl hopped to more than a fresh second lieutenant when the base commander showed up unannounced. Although her perkiness was infectious, yes, Dr. St. Clair, right away. The patient's son was still nervous. You think this will work? How long do you think it will take before we notice an improvement? Lily clucked her tongue in a professionally neutral manner. Yes, I do. And quickly enough that I have included a small dose of an anti-anxiety medication, as the process might be disorienting and confusing to your father. Shall we proceed? He nodded, and she administered the medication, which was a light benzo with specially programmed medicines suspended in solution. She would have liked to use the scanner to plot the medicines, but she did not use that device when anyone was liable to see it. It was beyond even pre-war technology, and she didn't want anyone to know it existed. But watching the misfolded proteins decrystallize in a cascade would have been fascinating. Like any genetic disease, this disease was eliminated before she was born. She could imagine the process, though, so she closed her eyes and did so, humming Vivaldi quietly. It didn't take more than a couple of minutes before the kindly but spacey, not all their glassy eyes of the patient started revealing a keen perception. Then there were shouts, crying, and displays of both emotion and public affection that made Lily uncomfortable, especially when several people hugged her. Still, she had a pleasant demeanor so as not to affect her bedside manner and just bore the indignity like the British do, with a stiff upper lip. She had to stop the patient and his son from declaring to the world that she had cured him. She did it politely but firmly, as her professionalism wouldn't permit any prevaricating. I'm glad the treatment was successful, but I did not cure your father. I treated him. His illness can't really be cured with my present technology. It will eventually reoccur, That quieted them down some. The patient seemed in well possession of his wits because he seemed to understand the situation. How long before I relapse? Then, doctor? She made the universal waffling gesture with her hands. It's a progressively degenerative disease and it's been reset back to zero. Start slow, too. You probably didn't notice symptoms of it for many years. I think you will likely experience slight cognitive decline in 10 to 15 years, and you will be back where you were when I met you in 20. The now spry old man guffawed, slapping his thigh with the palm of his hand in great humor. Damn. Doc, you had me worried there for a bit. Honestly, I don't plan living 20 more years, so that's as much cured as I can ever expect to get. I think. The man's son, though, didn't like that idea. Dad, you're barely 60, and it's like you said when I was younger. Heroes die young, but calamities last 1,000 years, so us old fellows have a lot of living left to do. Dad, how can we get follow-up treatments if it does reoccur? Lily snorted back a laugh. She liked that saying and was going to steal it. Well, while my plans could change, I do plan on, in the near future, to set up a practice in Megaton. While I won't guarantee I'll be there all the time, as I may spend a lot of time exploring the ruins of DC, that is probably where you will find me. You understand what I mean when I say that this is a congenital, genetic predisposition to this specific illness, right? The son now looked a lot more somber as he parsed the unusual words. It means that I will get it too when I get older? Lily clucked her tongue. She had scanned the son surreptitiously and looked at the results in her office earlier. He had no sign of the disease as of yet. Maybe it is recessive and often skips generations, but it is a possibility. You don't have it right now, though, I can say for sure. Not even the early stages when you wouldn't have noticed. Both of them looked relieved at that. How cute. That was a nice way to end the day. Better than the previous day when she had to tell an old lady she had advanced malignant tumors in nearly every organ in her body and had only weeks to live. Honestly, she was surprised the woman was alive at all, and even if Lily used her entire supply of medicines, there was no curing her. There were so many metastases that even doing a targeted therapy to destroy them would kill the woman. Practically a quarter of her body was cancerous. Something anyone working in medicine learns very soon, if they didn't want to go mad with the dread of it all, was you can't save everyone. Mr. Lewis, what can I do for you today? Asked Lily, beckoning him to sit while she sat back in the comfortable chair a grateful patient lent to her in her office. She had been beginning the initial steps for programming an engineering-based computer-aided design suite on her computer. It'd probably be at minimum a few weeks to get even a minimally helpful tool. She even hollowed out a broken terminal that could slide her diagnostic computer in so that it even looked like she was just typing on a terminal unless you were peeking over her shoulder. Lewis dusted his pants off before taking a seat in front of her. Doc St. Clair, nice to see you. I reckon you'll have seen the whole town in a few more days. First, I've been told a merchant caravan to Megaton will be leaving in a week's time. It won't be a motorized caravan, though. This guy has a gaggle of custom heavy-duty walking mule bots. He normally leverages these walking bots to make deliveries to areas where wheeled or hover transport can't reach, but he often returns to Megaton at the end of his circuit. This is that leg. It'll be pretty safe if you don't mind walking. Lily smiled and offered something tailored to Lewis's machismo sense of humor. Well, I can't say I would prefer hiking to being driven somewhere. I am, after all, a lady. He guffawed. I ain't about to correct you. I saw how it went for the last fellows. I'll set things up for you and mark you down as tentatively. You probably won't have to pay, but you will have to agree to act as possibly either a guard or doctor or both for the caravan during the trip. He paused. Now the less good news. Well, I reckon it depends. That list of things you wanted to buy, I've been able to acquire some of it. But he trailed off and glanced down at a list she had given him earlier, all the electronic stuff. You listed operating manuals for all Robco operating systems, maintenance manuals for all available Robco or General Atomics robots. Honestly, I didn't even know there was a difference in who made a robot. Then there was the spare parts, especially Central Pros Processor, the brains of any available robots, sensor modules, and a whole iBot. That last one, what you'd expect us to do. Steal one from the Enclave as President Eden is given, a speech. He stared at her in a gimlet expression. Lily winced. I thought I might have been asking for too much. Can't get any of it? Lewis ruefully chuckled. I didn't say that precisely. We might be able to, but the costs would be exorbitant fucking high. Lily had to stop herself from giggling. Since she saved his life, Lewis had been trying to add new words to his vocabulary with mixed success. He coughed, even after Bones a win on the whole town. I reckon you only got about half. And that's with my brother chargin' you cost, on account of how you saved my life and all. And he don't even charge me cost. Lily sighed, well, prioritize the books and I need at least 2 CPUs from any type of bot, but preferably ones like Mr. Handy series that affect a simulated personality and verbal machine interface. Lewis squinted at her hard. I take that to mean the ones that talk. He nodded, okay, we can do that. But there is another option, that's the main reason I came by. You see, there is a man in town who has practically everything you asked. He was the first one I went to try to buy some of it. Except he's something of a hermit, you see, and told me to take a hike. Her lips twitched upwards against her will. Yes, Lewis, the ones that talk. She tilted her head. She was pretty sure she knew which man he was talking about. In years, he would take up the guise of the superhero the Mechanist and had a small army of heavily armed robots, including fucking sentrybots of all things. She even knew where he lived. But she wasn't about to arrive like a Jehovah's Witness to a man with the reputation as a recluse who probably has at least a small robot army guarding his place. She motioned for Lewis to continue. Well, I was quite surprised when he showed up to see me. The whole town has been talking about how you gave old John his wits back, you see, and he heard that too. He told me that his mama is starting to go the same way. She lives up on a farm a couple of day hike from here, and he said if you make a house call and help her that he'd give you your entire shopping list and call it square. Except maybe not the iBot. Those are kinda rare, he said. She sat up in her chair, a bit surprised. That does sound like a good deal, but tell him I'm open to the possibility, but I'd need to speak with him first. Have him come by today, if he can, or as soon as he can. Lewis nodded, and then seeing there wasn't any further business he got up and said, I'll tell him, he's still in town. I expect he'll come to see you directly. He waited a moment before she realized that he was waiting for her to dismiss him. After she did, he departed with a polite ma'am and a tip of his hat. Old-fashioned chivalrous machismo is so fascinating. How did this guy who would seem more at home in a cowboy movie come to be on the East Coast? Maybe it was just that cowboys were survivors. She did note that since he was shot, he carried a pistol, but to her disappointment, it wasn't a peacemaker but a sleek-looking automatic. She only briefly got started in her programming projects before he returned, trailing what must be the future Mechanist. She politely stood as they entered but realized that neither man would sit until she took her seat again. So she just sat back down with an amused sigh. At least she wouldn't have to open her own doors when she was around this part of the world. That was just one less thing to worry about, she supposed. Lewis introduced them. Dr. St. Clair. This here is Scott Walensky, though folk round here call him Bean, though I don't reckon I know why. He's damn near the biggest man in town. Lily's lips kept twitching progressively upwards. He paused. Bean. Be known to Dr. Lilliane St. Clair. She talks a little funny, but she's a straight shooter. He nodded then. I won't stick my hat into your private business. Then, ma'am? He glanced at her inquisitively, and she nodded that he could take his leave, which he did so. Lily smiled across the table. Monsieur Walensky, a pleasure to make your acquaintance. And it would please me if you would call me Lily. The man nodded stiffly. Okay, Lily. Lewis gave me the list of things you wanted. I have most of them. Are you trying to learn how to work on electronics and robotics? If so, I will offer in addition to everything else my time. I will teach you for as long as you want to stay in town or until we can't stand each other. In exchange, you will cure my mom's dementia. There are no other parameters for the exchange I can think of. Do you accept? She blinked. This man was on the spectrum, for sure. But it was too good of a deal not to try, though, especially the individual tutoring. She might have to cancel that trip out on that caravan. Provisionally, yes, but there are some things you need to know first. First, I cannot treat every form of dementia. The Mechanist frowned. Explain. Lily sighed. How much do you know about how the brain works? The Mechanist tilted his head to the side. It uses electrical signals. Lily waited almost 30 seconds, but then came to the conclusion that was the full extent of his knowledge. Thinking quickly, she rephrased the question. Well, how much do you know about how computers work? The Mechanist brightened a bit. A lot. Lily smiled. Dementia can be classified. then as a progressively degenerative condition of the processor, storage, and random access memory of a person. Do you understand? He nodded, yes. Put like that, it makes a lot of sense. So she continued, there are many different types of dementia, but there are two main causes. The first is the type where areas in memory, blocks in storage, and parts of your processor are physically and irreparably destroyed. However, Alzheimer's disease is more common, and it could be more analogous to where parts of memory and storage blocks are flagged as unavailable to the processor, while the processor is infected with malicious code. Do you understand the distinction? The mechanist didn't pause at all but nodded firmly. I do. You explained it very well. You can only treat those with Alzheimer's disease. Do you know what kind of dementia my mom has? Lily shook her head, not without examining her. It is more likely to be Alzheimer's, given what you have told me, but I wanted to set your expectations. And also amend our agreement. Normally, I only charge if the treatment is successful, but that doesn't include a 2-day hike house call. The mechanist pursed his lips. So long as you promise to do your best to help her, I will fulfill 1/3 of your list even if your treatment fails. Thank you for explaining things so simply. We'll leave tomorrow. He nodded to her and looked expectingly. Lily blinked. After a moment, she just nodded, and he left. Well, he was a character, Alice. Reschedule all my appointments tomorrow through Saturday. Please. I'll be unavailable. A body built for sin. Lily woke up hours before sunrise. As always, she vacillated between feeling amazement that she only needed 3 or 4 hours of sleep at night to annoyance at needing to sleep at all. But she was entirely grateful that her basic gene optimizations included that feature. She was still at a point where any civilized habitat would deny her entry because her biomorph body wasn't even at the baseline level it considered safe. She'd be treated like a historical samurai that was somehow displaced out of space, appearing in the middle of Tokyo. Kindly, curiously, but at a minimum, such a hypothetical person would be given vaccinations or monitored for a communicative disease before being let loose upon the world. And considering her culture had salvaged Neanderthal DNA and cloned and uplifted them, that was saying a lot. She wasn't sure her fragile pride would survive a Neanderthal morph looking down their nose at her. Uplifted animals weren't so bad because it was hard to anthropomorphize an intelligent octopus without having a proper mesh insert to communicate electronically. Maybe she was just as well in this post-apocalyptic desert where she was indisputably the most civilized person on the planet. Wait, they had AGIs on this planet, didn't they? ZAX units. Her long-term survival depended on either killing or subverting one, specifically. Well, at least the title of most civilized meatbag was hers. She sighed as she worked on her morning ablutions. Since she was traveling with someone else that she could reasonably trust, she wasn't being as paranoid. Since she was working at the clinic, she had braided her hair in a single long alternating braid that ended just past her rear. She used a small silver bracelet she found in Vault 108 to terminate the braid. She thought it looked quite nice, so she redid the braid after washing her face. She would wrap it up in an ad hoc bun if they had to trundle through brush or thickety areas or expected possible combat, but she had grown to like the look of it, and she thought other people did too. Indeed, it was a sign of wealth or power to have as long, well-cared-for hair as she did. She believed it would give people she met subtle social signals even if they didn't understand it consciously. She had to ask Lewis when and where to meet Scott in the morning, since he just up and left before stating anything more than tomorrow. Lewis figured he meant just prior to sunrise and at the clinic. She wondered if the incipient mechanist would consider such a time and place so evident that it didn't, in fact, need to be stated. Probably. She slid back into her white/gray bodysuit. While doing her clinic rounds, she had been wearing some purchased clothes, including an actual lab coat or at least a good impression of one. It wasn't that the clothes were even close to as good, but it was hard to do laundry if you only had one set of clothes. The hole where Gary shot her in the ass wasn't even evident. It wasn't that the clothing was actively self-repairing, but the weave was so tiny that the hole closed up. Probably wouldn't be quite as bullet-resistant at that location anymore, though. Next, she donned her combat armor, holsters for her weapons, and camelback. She had packed her ruck for a 5-day trip, but that was her being conservative as she assumed that there would be opportunities to forage for provisions and restock water. She had to say that pure water without the radioactive particulates and slight heavy metal toxicity really agreed with her. She had been noticeably peppier since she stopped drinking the radioactive water. However, she thought the little bit of cesium actually made her MRE instant coffee taste better. That was going to be a limited luxury here soon. There didn't seem to be much global trade, and it wasn't like coffee beans were cultivated on the East Coast. Last night, she took the time to extract from her blood into a small solution of saline and program some medicines for an Alzheimer's treatment, followed by general brain maintenance. That was about as many instructions she could fit on that few nanomachines. Their processing and storage capability, absent a nanohive, increased with their relative local population, but it would still be cheaper to have multiple vials of medikine solutions. The only downside being injecting one person with two different kinds would cause the program schema to conflict and all of them to shut down in safety mode. She had a few other pre-programmed ampoules, the most interesting one being a hostile medikine attack which would temporarily paralyze all voluntary nerve inputs. Now, if she could find a blowgun, she would be in business like one of those uncontacted tribesmen living in the Amazon or Congo, who would, in fiction, jump out of the tall grass and shoot a dart into Indiana Jones' neck. Until then, she could draw a small amount in a syringe, and it would give her an alternative to a lethal takedown with her knife. It would be helpful in interrogation situations, too, as most people become unnerved if they are reduced to being able to only breathe and blink. She ate a hearty breakfast and went outside to wait. She didn't have to wait long. Scott hadn't taken up the mantle of the mechanist yet, so the armor was just run-of-the-mill metal combat armor, but to her surprise, 3 robots were with him. They all appeared to be Mr. Handy derivatives. One was obviously a Mr. Gutsy. The other might have been a chopped-down Mr. Handy. It seemed to be missing the articulating tools, and the chassis was cut down. It looked like a floating half-sphere. The last was what appeared to be a Mr. Handy without any of the usual tools or weapons at all. Instead, each of the limbs featured a dexterous-looking manipular claw, and its chassis was impeccably painted white with pastel trim. She was reminded of men in her previous life that would spend an entire afternoon waxing the paint job of their classic car. Whatever this robot's purpose was, it was well cared for. Scott came up to me and nodded. "You're ready, good. Lily, this is Sophie." "Sophie, be introduced to Dr. Liliane St. Clair." The well-coffeed white robot floated up to her and spoke in an even more affected French accent than Lily had decided on. Her eyebrows went up into her skull. "Ah, hello, Dr. St. Clair. It is nice to meet you. Scott has told me all about you. Thank you so very much for agreeing to help his mama." Lily glanced between the robot girl named Sophie and Scott and back again. Surely he hadn't programmed this robot with a French accent overnight? Then whatever this model was came with one. She didn't recognize it. Was it just a custom Mr. Handy? Well, Miss Handy now, she supposed. Still, some of her best friends were robots. Heck, she was a robot until recently, too. It is nice to make your acquaintance as well, and it would be my pleasure if you would call me Lily, Sophie. And there is no need to be so effusive. Scott is paying me. Sophie seemed to vibrate in her chassis in excitement and said, in French, he told me you talk as I do, but I just assumed that he meant that you were, nice. I haven't had the chance to speak like this in ages. Your accent is almost Parisian, and is music to the ears. Lily giggled softly, replying in the same language, thank you very much. I can see how you would think that. Scott, he does appear very much the gentleman, but he is a bit brusque and to the point, isn't he? Sophie did a complete 360-degree rotation in exuberance. Yes. He is so kind, but he is not ever so much for the words, my Scott. Let's switch back to English so he isn't so left out. Lily froze momentarily in comprehension. My Scott? The future mechanist had seemed a hair warmer when introducing the robot to her, and if she recalled from the game, the mechanist had taken up the mantle of superhero and swore eternal vengeance against the antagonizer after the antagonizer's aunts killed an important woman to him. Considering he lived a hermit's life, Lily had thought that this woman was probably the same mother she was going to help. But now, she couldn't help but have a sly grin as she gave him the side eye. Scott, you dog, you. Lily kept to the French briefly to tease the fembit. You're Scott? Oh, ho-ho. Are there wedding bells in the future? This caused the white robot to sputter scandalously, spin in a circle and possibly change run levels in embarrassment. If she had a coat of chroma-variable smart paint, she would have no doubt that her chassis would be blushing bright red. Lily chuckled again. Sorry, Scott. I was just teasing Sophie. Girl talk, you know. The mechanist, however, just seemed a bit confused and replied, "No." After a pause, he asked curiously, "What language were you speaking?" "I've never in my life heard another language than English." He paused. "Actually, I think I've heard Chinese. There are still some occasional Chinese propaganda radio transmissions that we receive intermittently. But that wasn't Chinese." Lily smiled and laid it on thick. "Ah, it was French. France was a coastal country in Europe. Quite a pretty language, no? Before the bombs dropped. It had the well-deserved reputation as a language of love. Many romantic terms originate from French. Perhaps Sophie could teach you a little? At minimum, it could be a useful code language you two could speak in privacy amongst most other people in the Wasteland." The white robot did a circle around both of us before tittering embarrassedly. "Ah, yes, I would love to if you ever wanted to, Scott." He seemed to consider it before nodding. "A private code language would be useful." "What kind of romantic terms are French?" Lily smiled beatifically. "There are so many. Perhaps I should just tell you my favorite, and you can have Sophie translate it for you when you're alone." Scott nodded. "Hook, line, and sinker. Sometimes these verbal traps set themselves." She smiled innocently at him. "La petite mort." Sophie sputtered incoherently while Scott tilted his head to the side before replying, "I don't know what that is." Lily grinned the grin of a cat who had stolen all the cream. "I'm sure she can help you with that also." That, apparently, was the straw that broke the camel's back. It caused the robo-girl named Sophie actually briefly to shut down and reboot in sheer embarrassment. Scott looked concerned for a moment, but she levitated back into the air, and her sensors stared daggers at Lily. She must have Scott wrapped around her little manipulator because she easily changed the subject. "Ah, perhaps we should be off, no? I don't want to waste the daylight." "Lily, you can hang your pack on that third floating platform." It was sadly a Mr. Handy that was irreparably damaged. There is no processor or controlling personality, just a small circuit board that Scott designed that plays follow the leader with whatever is walking in front of it. There are hooks to hang belongings, and the standard Mr. Handy levitation system can lift more than 500 kilos. Quite ingenious, no? Lily blinked. That was smart. If she met a rampant Mr. Handy or Mr. Gutsy in the wastes, she'd try her best to aim at the brain to leave the rest intact to make her own hovering pack mule. She clipped her rucksack to one of the eyelets with a heavy-duty carabiner. Wait, levitation. Blinking down at it, she finally noticed it wasn't shooting a jet of fire out the bottom for propulsion like in the game. That is different. She wondered if she was in an AU again or if it was just similar to how all the weapons were more realistic. They started walking at false dawn, pausing a little bit out of town when darkness returned. Lily had to have her curiosity sated. "Sophie?" The robot replied, "Yes, Miss Lily? You don't seem to be a standard General Atomics Handy model. If you don't mind me asking, do you have a model number designation?" asked Lily as they waited for the real dawn to arrive. Sophie seemed enthused. "Ah, of course not. I am always happy to discuss this. I am a Miss Nanny model. Je pride of General Atomics." The Miss Nanny model was designed primarily for domestic, feminine duties to include, of course, as a nanny, governess, tutor, maid, chef, and any number of other possibilities through expanded skill packs, which are available for sale at a reasonable cost. Or would have been if General Atomics was still in business, I suppose. We were the last model created by General Atomics, and were intended to be a potential completely upgraded and possible replacement for Mr. Handy's, who might be better suited for outside light duty like landscaping, gardening, waxing the car, and security. Lily nodded. "What sort of upgrades did they work into your chassis?" "If you don't mind me saying, you certainly passed my personal Turing test, and I am quite discriminating as far as that goes." Scott seemed interested in that. "What is a Turing test?" Sophie seemed to preen at the compliment and answered Scott. The Turing test was devised by a theoretical competition named Alan Turing in 1947, shortly after the Second World War, as a theoretical way to examine a machine's ability to exhibit social intelligence equivalent to, or indistinguishable from, that of a human. If I have passed her personal Turing test, then she means I am, or at least act, indistinguishable from a human. It's possibly the nicest thing anyone that isn't you has ever said to me. She paused a moment before continuing. "Thank you for that, Miss Lily." The upgrades were full spectrum, but the biggest was in the quantum core processor. It has more than 20 times the flops as the Mr. Handy, and more than 1,000 times the memory. We are the first General Atomics product to use a state-of-the-art solid-state memory system instead of magnetic or hollow storage technology, she said proudly. Then she squinted with the irises on her optical sensors, seeming considering something. Miss Lily, you seem extremely educated on topics that people just don't teach other people anymore. Who provides a classical pre-war education these days? I wonder. Lily chuckled a bit and rubbed the back of her head. Ahaha. Yes, I suppose I am. I'd rather not really talk about that, though, if you don't mind. She was saved from further awkwardness by a mole rat burrowing up from the ground and trying to eat her foot. She kicked it straight in the snoot and then jumped back to create distance. Sophie levitated out of the way of the melee while several more of the critters appeared. She cleared leather, shot the first mole rat in the eye, and then looked for new targets. Mr. Gutsy yelled, "Have it you!" Then, and completely bisected one with a continuous laser beam. It played across the giant rodent's body. Shit, she didn't know they could do that. She thought they were just mounted with traditional pulse lasers if they had laser weapons. Everything seemed slightly more dangerous in this world, or at least had the potential to be. Scott shot another with a laser pistol that acted more like a shotgun in how it reduced the mole rat to giblets. Lily finally found the last target, but it took 4 rounds in the side as it was charging Sophie, who kept backing away from it, to put it down. Lily frowned at the fact that Sophie seemed limited to runaway strategy. Such a cheery individual was like a rare gem in the wastes. There was no way she would let such an innocent girl die to a swarm of ants. She made a solemn vow that she would protect the happiness of this fembit. There had to be upgrades, even just armor, that would preserve her against some mere ants. There were a couple of encounters like that the next 2 days, but Mr. Gutsy was OP as fuck and usually took care of things without anyone else having to do much at all. Once, they took sporadic long-range fire from a group of feral-looking raiders who wouldn't close into a range that Mr. Gutsy could obliterate them at, which showed that they were both smart and stupid. Tactically cunning for recognizing the threat and leveraging a range advantage, but ridiculous for trying to engage anyway. Even if they killed us, how did they expect to get the loot off our bodies with the Mr. Gutsy still operational? Their marksmanship was horrendous, though, and she was able to pick 3 off with 6 or 7 shots from 200 meters from a prone firing position with her carbine. The rest fucked off after that. A little past noon the second day, Scott stopped the party and said, "Her farm is just up here. Let me go first." I provided a couple of protectrons who might attack an unidentified person at arms coming up the walk. The farm seemed somewhat prosperous, which surprised her. She mentioned it to Scott, who scoffed, "It is now. But when I was a kid, we flirted with starvation every day. The reason they call me Bean? It's because my parents sold me indenture to a caravan merchant for some beans." Lily didn't remember that part of the lore, if it was in the game. She seemed shocked and Scott shook his head. "It was the best thing for me. Saved my life, probably. The merchant gave my folks the beans just a salve to pride. It was really charity to take me in. He taught me a lot and I never went hungry. Eventually, I discovered I had a knack for machines, but not for people, and settled in the commons, close enough by my folks that I could help them." Lily still was in shock, but only because that was more words than she had heard Scott say since she met him, combined. Lily guessed from the absence that Papa Mechanist had already gone through the pearly gates, so she didn't mention it. A complete family was living here, though. Apparently, it was his sister, husband, 2 children, both girls, and Nana Mechanist who she was here to treat. It was, perhaps, the first completely happy-looking family that she had either seen or heard tale about. She briefly fiddled with her operational Pip-Boy to drop a marker on the moving map at their present location. She had repaired it a few days ago when she had bought a soldering iron and some electronic scrap. Sadly, of course, there was no inventory tab that linked to a hammer space or skills tab where she could empower herself with points. Surprisingly, there was a tab that displayed a health breakdown, including blood pressure, heart rate, and theoretically injuries, although that part remained untested. She was interested in what sensors could allow a device on her arm to detect all that without any apparent light-based pulse oximetry or blood pressure cuff. There was a quests tab too, although it was labeled tasks, and she had to delete all the entries as they were repeating Gary, Gary, Gary over and over. Uncle Mechanist was sure a hit. The kids loved him, as did his sister and her husband. He must have been the source of this farm's prosperity. Protectrons to guard it, and possibly a Mr. Handy or 2 to help in the fields. She felt that he had balanced it well. It was a hard target for a casual raider attack, as they didn't have anything more valuable than food, it seemed like. Still, she suspected many a raider were turned into compost here anyway. As subsistence farmers, they were wealthy beyond measure, though, and they seemed happy. It was cute that he seemed to care for his family, even if he didn't like most other people. She was introduced to the whole clan. The littlest girl remarking that Dr. St. Clair talked just like Aunt Sophie made her grin. They offered a light lunch, but Lily shook her head. Let's put a pin on that, no? If it works, the treatment for your mom will be quite rapid, and perhaps she would want to join us for that lunch. She had taken her scanner out but kept the screen off while she scanned both Scott's madre as well as each of the other family members. Since she got the Pip-Boy operating, she decided that she would tell people she trusted somewhat that she had a specialized medical module for her Pip-Boy. It was really the 12K full-color display that was shocking if people saw it. That interface technology in such a miniature package was decades beyond what was usually available. Ah, Sophie, Scott, Lily began. Can I ask the both of you to keep a secret for me? Sophie replied instantly, of course, Miss Lily. Scott hesitated. So long as it doesn't involve anything that would hurt us. Sure. Lily tilted her head and nodded. It doesn't. I have what might best be described as an experimental medical module for my Pip-Boy. I'd rather people did not know this. Could you help me keep it a secret? It really isn't all that special, just kind of unique, and if the wrong people found it, well, it might tell them more about my past than I'd prefer. I'm living in a new world now, and I'd like to keep the past in the past. I've already taken readings from your mom, but I need a private place to interpret them. Scott relaxed appreciably. Oh, that's no problem. He noticed the scanner with the screen off. It does look quite state-of-the-art to be a medical device. If you like, if someone finds out about it, you can tell them I made it for you. And maybe we can build something, a case or something, to make it stand out less. Give it less a straight off the factory and more of a scavenged look and feel. That was a good idea. She planned on hacking the Pip-Boy too. There had to be a data line or port. If she could build a specialized microcontroller with a wireless module, she could have the scanner actually interface with the Pip-Boy and bring up a textual diagnosis on screen. Then she could use it more around people without startling others or inviting covetous thoughts. She was led to a sunroom, where she sat and pulled up the medical scans of the family. She let out a sigh of relief. Scott's mom did have Alzheimer's. She wasn't relieved for the reward so much anymore as much as wanting to help him stay happy. In her opinion, anyone who dated a robot was ipso facto a good person, especially a robot as sweet as Sophie was. She wanted to make a note to find where they manufactured Miss Nannies. She couldn't very well act on her desire to disassemble her friend to see how she worked. Now, could she? She flipped through the rest of the family. A few nutritional issues. The husband had arthritis, and oh, that was interesting. Mazel tov, Mrs. Mechanist's sister. The pregnancy was just far enough along that she probably started to suspect, maybe 5 weeks by the look at the zygote development. While the process of sex differentiation hadn't even started yet, eukaryotic chromosomal pairs were much bigger and easier to distinguish than individual DNA triplets or codons. So the sex was clearly decoded on the screen in a single scan. Perhaps they'd like to know. She'd arranged to have a private chat with the mom-to-be. She stowed her device and pulled out the small 5 cubic centimeters ampoule for the Alzheimer's treatment as well as a similar ampoule that had some medicines with default programming. She'd offer the latter to the husband to clear up arthritis in his knees. It should barely be enough nanomachines there to do it, she figured. Lily stuck her head out the door and called, Scott, can you bring your mom and maybe your sister into the sunroom? It is Alzheimer's like we hoped, and we can begin her treatment right away. However, it might be best for her to sit down in here for the few minutes it takes for the treatment to work. She didn't have any benzos with her, so it would be best if she could relax through it. Scott, nanomechanist, and his sister arrived. Scott and her sister looked extremely excited, but their mom looked churlish. Well, it seemed like she was one of the people who get cranky when they get dementia compared to her last patient, who was more gentle. Nanomechanist wasn't having it. If you want your mom dead, you don't have to trick me, Scotty. I'll go off and find Pa on my own. You don't need to have some whore poison me. This strumpet ain't even old enough to be a doctor. What bordello did you drag her out of? No woman that works for a living has hair that long unless it's on her back. How much did she charge you, with that body built for sin? Lily almost tripped, fell and broke the small glass ampoules she was carrying. Strumpet? Whore? Body built for sin? Well, that last one she kind of liked the sound of. It made her sound like some sort of Bond girl. Lily St. Clair, body built for sin, licensed to thrill. But wait, weren't Bond girls always murdered in the end? She had to stop herself from snickering at her inner thoughts and gave Nana a professionally neutral gaze. This bitch seemed awfully observant for someone whose brain was half crystallized. She thought. Scott's sister became apoplectic when she heard a tiny voice in the next room tell Sophie, "I want to live in a bordello too," followed by another little girl's voice yelling, "Strumpet, strumpet." Scott tried to calm her. "She really is a doctor, mother. Please do not say such things." But all that got him was a scoff as Nana sat down and said, "Fine. I won't put up a fight. I miss your dad anyway. And I know how it is. Y'all can't afford to feed me when I can't help round here anymore." Lily rolled her eyes at the high drama unfolding and decided the best solution was the quick band-aid removal. "I doubt you'll convince her, Scott. Let's just let the treatment speak for itself, no?" He nodded. She approached the old lady, a professional smile on her lips. "Don't worry. I'm quite adept at this." Nana scowled at killing old women, to which I surprised her by chuckling. "Well, that too, I suppose, if I put my mind to it. But only crazy raider grannies. I meant giving injections. See? All done." Nana kept the scowl on her face. "There ain't no damn raider gran." She trailed off as the medicines must have passed the blood-brain barrier and begun identifying and decrystallizing pockets of her brain. She stared off into space and even drooled a bit. Scott looked concerned. "Is that supposed to happen?" Lily shrugged. "Yes, more or less. The detection process dampens nearby electrical signals, so it is almost like she is in a temporary coma. It took the last patient about 160 seconds to recover to full lucidity." Scott nodded and held his mom's hand, and she could just hear in his head him counting. What a nice son, Lily thought. He and his robo-wife deserve to be happy. Perhaps she should assassinate the antagonist before she even tries to kill Sophie. But Lily didn't quite remember what she looked like, except when she was wearing that costume. She also was pretty sure she wasn't a local. A few moments later, Nana Mechanist starts blinking, then orienting herself before looking up at me. Her cheeks go red as a turnip. I suppose that means the treatment didn't interfere with her short-term memory. Honestly, Lily thought it would. You learn something new every day. The old lady sounds completely mortified. "I'm so sorry, doctor." Lily grins back down at her. "It's okay. I'm gonna put that on my office door." Lily and St. Clair, doctor, built for sin. Scott's sister finally returns after scolding her two daughters to find her mom already treated. Again, there was much crying and cavorting about, but this time Scott looked as uncomfortable as Lily did with the hugs and affection. They shared a glance in shared suffering and completely understood each other, at least for that one moment. "I'd like to see Sarah alone for a moment, if you guys don't mind," Lily said as they all got up to go have lunch. Sister Mechanist stayed behind. "Yes." Lily smiled. "I have certain medical technology and couldn't help but notice that congratulations should be in order." She smiled, holding her hands up to her bosom. "I was right then? I haven't told anyone yet. I wasn't sure. I missed my period last week, but that sometimes happens. You know?" Lily nodded politely. She pretended, but she didn't know. Involuntary menstruation would probably have been considered cruel and unusual torment in any space habitat she knew of. Lily offered gently, "Would you like to know if it's a boy or girl?" This shocked the woman. "You can tell so soon?" She started wringing her hands. "He's always wanted a son, but I know he'd be happy regardless." But still, there was a pause, and she nodded. "Yes, tell me." "It's a boy," Lily confirmed. This caused Sister Mechanist to out-and-out fist pump. "Yes, Dennis will be so psyched." Lily chuckled. An interesting fact one learns in medical school. You understand the concept that a baby is half you and half your husband. Yes, she nodded. Lily continued, "Well, in mammals, the large gamete, that's the egg, that's you, is always female. There are no male parts to it. You could even say that every human is by default a girl at first. However, that is a mite philosophic. In any case, the man's contribution, the sperm, provides sex assignment and differentiation. He's the only one that could have anything to do with what sex your children are. So he must have really wanted two daughters. That caused her to laugh uproariously. She briefly spent some time explaining about her husband's arthritis and brought him in to treat it before a nice meal was served. She was offered the guest room and she took it. The bed was soft. She fell asleep before the sun was down, which just meant she woke up about the same time others were falling asleep since she needed such little sleep by comparison. She worked on her computer until it was time to get up and begin the trek back home, as temporary as it was. If she was going to stay here for longer than she thought, she would have to accelerate some of her plans. She intended to wait until she put down roots in Megaton to build her first fabricator or healing vat, but that just wouldn't do. Daydreams. Inside a surprisingly clean but mostly bare room sat a woman with long braided blonde hair at a long, flat table that was covered in miscellaneous parts, tools, and supplies. She was putting the finishing touches on what appeared to be a footlocker. However, the inside was segmented into 4 compartments which looked meticulously clean and fitted with various wires, electronics, and hydraulic tubing. Lily tilted her head to the side, which caused the metal-on-metal tinkling sound as the silver bracelet she used as the end of her braid dragged on the metal floor. But she was well aware of its location, as it only took one time face-planting on the floor after tripping on your own braided hair when you tried to stand up to make you hypervigilant in the future. She was finishing soldering the access jack for a rugged programmable serial port data line in a waterproofed dust cover shielded port that she had drilled out on the lid. Then she carefully fitted it in place, along with a circle of rubberized weatherproofing she carefully measured and cut out earlier. Humming, she finalized the installation with silicone-based epoxy around the edges of the programming port, underneath the weather stripping. She followed all the best practices in assembling a device that both used hydraulics and high-voltage electricity and may or may not be exposed to the elements for periods of time, according to the textbooks she had been reading. Thinking back to when she showed up to the first lesson with Scott, it had consisted of him handing her duffel bag of textbooks and telling her to read these. She had started to come to the opinion that the man who became the superhero known as the Mechanist in his grief probably hadn't been obsessed with comic books like she initially thought. He probably just had such low interpersonal skills that he used comics as a research tool for how one should act when they become a vigilante and need to defeat a supervillain. It would explain the campy dialogue she remembered him having in the game. That didn't explain the antagonist, though, but she was pretty sure that bitch was just crazy. She wanted to have ants kill all humankind, after all, and lived in a giant ant hive. At first, she thought reading the textbooks, especially some of them, would be a waste of time. She was both a practicing electrical engineer and a researcher of synthetic cyberware in the past, after all. It was a fact that most technologies in this universe looked clunky, like the aesthetics were from the space age and atomic age, rather than the sleek devices she was used to. However, there was something to be said about the engineering principles of a society that knew, with 100% certainty, that they were running out of resources. They built things to last, which is why much of the stuff they built was still running even now. She decided that her inventions would follow this principle even if she had to scale up some devices to a clunkier but more robust aesthetic. Except for cybernetics, she would maintain strict miniaturization and aesthetic discipline there. She was an artist, after all. What she was working on now was her first-generation nanofabricator. The design spec for this device, which she had been dreaming up in her head since she arrived in this universe, had many weaknesses and wasn't very versatile at all. Its main problems were that it would take a lot of power, had limited print size, and would only be able to construct 3D prints out of carbon allotropes. That was still pretty impressive when you think that diamond, Lonsdaleite, graphene sheets, and nanotubes were all made out of carbon. It was still awe-inspiring. Or it would be. Right now, it might be better called merely a nanostabilizer. She had only finished the first compartment inside, which eventually would be the actual fabrication chamber. It was filled with an ultra-low viscosity oil and already had hundreds of trillions of nanites in suspension. This was the chamber where the fabricated objects would be printed inside the liquid. It wasn't large and would only allow her to build objects with dimensions slightly bigger than a bread box, but that was more than sufficient for her needs at the moment. However, without its own dedicated nanohive, it couldn't build anything or control any of the nanites in any acceptable way. So she had wired the low-end quantum processor from an iBot to manage the entire device. It turned out that while operational iBots were rare, scrapped ones were some of the most common bots in the capital Wasteland. She had to admit that she was somewhat impressed by the quantum processors used by Robco and General Dynamics robots. The central processor for an iBot was about the size of an undersized grape, and Lily already had ideas of incorporating it into several neural cybernetics. While eventually this processor would be used to run the fabricator, right now, it was used to preserve the nanites inside the suspension fluid. In the absence of a nanohive or other central controlling computer, nanites, hermeticines included, had a very short shelf life. Yet, at the same time, she would need a large number of nanites, more than she could reasonably store in her body, to ramp up to the point where she could build a new nanohive to install in the fabricator. Kind of a chicken and the egg problem, she supposed. The processor was acting as a jury-rigged nanohive. It didn't have the production capability a real one had, but it could handle command and control, which would reduce the percentage of nanomachine attrition in the suspension fluid from 20% daily to less than 0.001%. Building a critical part that was required to operate the fabricator in the fabricator before the fabricator was even built was going to be another challenge. Still, she knew a couple of ways it could be accomplished. But, unfortunately, they were laborious and annoying. Glancing at her laptop, she double-checked that her internal metachines were gathering in the blood of her thumb as programmed before taking a penknife and cutting her thumb, dripping blood into the suspension fluid steadily for over a minute. The thinking part of this build was mostly done for now. Now she just had to bleed into it for about a month or so. She had been cutting her own thumb so often lately that she half expected herself to start saying, "Kuchios no Jutsu," and summon a giant slug. It had been a week since she had returned to Canterbury Commons, and Scott had surprised her by offering her a room in his, not quite, secret superhero lair that was better known as an old discount electronics store that was a 20-minute walk out of town. He had said that she was the only other person besides his nieces that treated Sophie like a regular person. She had snorted and said that she was a regular person, that it didn't matter what substrate a mind operated on, be it squishy neurons, quantum computers, or even something we haven't discovered yet. A person was a person was a person. That was when he had offered her a room in his lair for as long as she would stay in town, and she had accepted. The place was a fortress of protectrons and sentrybots. He even had one assaultron operational, which you didn't see too often in DC, and several more in bits. She cracked her knuckles and put pencil to paper for the next invention. She had been working on it for days, but unfortunately, it was stuck in the design phase right now. To proceed further, she would have to have an operational fabricator to first build what would become plasma coils. Then, these pencil-thick graphene tubes would need to have a lithium-doped refractory alloy vacuum deposited onto them to become superconductive at room temperature. At that point, they could be used as the electromagnetic containment walls of a high-temperature plasma acceleration loop. Plasma rifles and pistols operated similarly, except they just accelerated the plasma from the microfusion cell linearly out the weapon's barrel. In fact, she had cribbed half the design elements from a plasma gun on a scrapped Mr. Gutsy in the shop. She had been amazed when she studied the microfusion cells she had bought from the merchants. They were a literal small fusion reactor, and they were only about the size of a small thermos of coffee. She couldn't believe it. Of course, she knew that they said microfusion cell on the tin, so she wasn't sure what else she was expecting, but it still was amazing. It was the absolute most fantastic example of miniaturization of high-energy plasma generation and containment she had seen in her entire life. Even transhumanity's stable fusion reactors, the smallest, were the size of a broom closet, or a hot water heater at best for the cutting edge. However, the obvious question was, if they were an actual fusion reactor, then why, for the love of Thorologesus, was electricity so hard to come by in the Wasteland? Well, it was because stable, net-positive plasma generation isn't, on its own, electricity. You could use some of this plasma for useful purposes or destructive ones, as that was how plasma guns worked, but a microfusion cell would run out of fuel quickly if you used it to heat water to turn a turbine to generate electricity. After all, nobody tried generating power by shooting a steam boiler with plasma rifles. It just wasn't an effective energy transfer. In other words, she wanted to invent a practical, mobile, fusion electric generator system that used the ubiquitous and readily available microfusion cells and did so economically. If you wanted small fusion electrical generators, the more advanced fusion cores which the same pre-war company Mass Fusion produced were one solution. The only solution, as far as she knew. These were used in power armor primarily, but could be used as a generator. In fact, she was pretty sure that was their original intended function, and power armors were more or less designed around this power source rather than the other way around. She hadn't got her hands on one of these yet, but she knew they generated electricity directly. She wasn't quite sure how, given their size, but thought that maybe they utilized the more complicated and higher temperature proton-boron fusion cycle. That was the only type of fusion that produced electricity directly without having to exploit the plasma in some way. So it was the only option she was aware of, but she wasn't anywhere near as educated on power systems or nuclear physics as she was on biology. So she was just winging it, which actually sounded kind of scary when combined with nuclear power. She knew she wasn't a genius in this area like the people who invented the fusion cores. There was no way she could build a system like that. Hell, the only reason her generator idea was possible was that she didn't have to make the microfusion cells that were almost 80% of the system's complexity. But with a running microfusion cell, if she could pipe the plasma through the superconducting loop, then she could take advantage of magnetohydrodynamics. Plasma was made entirely of ions, and all ions were electrically conductive. A super hot, fast-moving, electrically conductive plasma traveling through a loop functioned as a powerful generating coil, producing electricity directly. It was almost exactly how traditional generators worked, just that the movement that created the electrical field wasn't being sourced from a belt or drive shaft that turned a solid magnet, but instead a moving magnetic fluid, the plasma. The best part was, of course, the plasma was almost entirely reused. The only energy loss was radiated heat and the electricity extracted from the generator, which was required to keep the hydrodynamic loops electromagnetic containment powered. If her math was correct, a footlocker-sized generator of her design could provide over 1 to 2 megawatts of electricity for years before needing the microfusion cell replaced. On the other hand, the fission reactor of a U.S. aircraft carrier was about as big as a house and only provided 100 megawatts. The main design trouble she was running into was dissipating the waste heat without melting the plasma loop. The cooling apparatus might be 3 times bigger than the generator. She wished she could talk to someone who actually understood high-energy plasma systems or power generators, as she was sure her design was poorly optimized, and probably somewhat unsafe, as a stray bullet to the generator while it was operating would cause the plasma to lose containment and release an explosion like a plasma grenade which would likely incinerate everything within 2 or 3 meters. It made her almost want to go to the Brotherhood. She was sure that they would love this design as it would provide effective mobile electricity generation without utilizing fusion cores, which they would no doubt prefer to use in power armor. With their help, she might even be able to optimize it so it provided enough power to use in vehicles. However, she knew vertibirds used combustible fuel, which must be a considerable supply bottleneck for the Brotherhood. She wondered where they were even sourcing it from, but if she could increase the power output to at least 10 megawatts without increasing the size by more than 3 or 4 times, it would be of equivalent horsepower and size to whatever gas turbine the vertibirds were running. Nuclear-powered vertibirds sounded cool as hell. Maybe in the future. At a minimum, she had to loot the VSS building first and establish a bit of a name for herself. Otherwise, she'd be shuffled off as some no-name initiate scribe or given no freedom at all. Or worse, she would be protected as a valuable and upcoming source of technology, even if she didn't want to be. She liked the goals of the Brotherhood under Elder Lyons, but not so much the tech hoarding and xenophobia clannishness of the West Coast Brotherhood or the Brotherhood Outcasts, although she suspected the schism hadn't occurred yet. But she definitely wasn't about to give away her freedom. If she could approach them already in power armor with novel technology of her own devising, power systems, human augmentation, she could write her own ticket at that point. Then, she wouldn't need to worry too much about being stifled or controlled as scribes typically were, and could negotiate a relationship where she could come and go as she pleased. An associate scribe, perhaps? She shook her head. She had been daydreaming. She was thinking about things 15 or 16 steps away when she was still struggling with step 2. Still, she had made good progress. It had only been 2 weeks since Gary had shot her in the ass. She was more or less safe, wasn't starving or being raped to death by cannibals. That made her feel almost content. She sat her pencil down, glanced at the Pip-Boy's chronometer and stood up. She had 3 more textbooks to read, a shift in her clinic, and a lesson on robotics with both Sophie and Scott before the day was over. The robot girl almost knew as much as he did. Of course, it wasn't unusual for girls who were head over heels to become interested in the same things their boyfriends were, but she supposed that was unfair to assume. It was possible Sophie, the nanny, always had a deep interest in dismantling and rebuilding Robco protectrons. Lily snickered before hitting the books. Divinity. For a time, Lily felt that she was back working 80-hour weeks, although without the stress. It was really the best when you were your own boss. She would wake up several hours before sunrise, run around the exterior of the electronics warehouse for about an hour and then take a morning shower, albeit it was abbreviated as even radioactive water fit for showering was on a bit of a premium at Scott's lair. First, of course, one usually had to fill the cistern on the top of the building manually. So, her first actually useful invention in this world was what she called a high-pressure shower to replace the traditional shower that wasted a lot of water Scott had been using. It was pretty simple, just an extra water reservoir above the shower that was kept pressurized by an air compressor and a small touch-activated panel under the shower head. You'd step in the shower, touch the button, and it would spritz you briefly with a high-pressure mist. Then you'd soap up, hit it again, and wash off. It wasn't as lovely as standing under a shower was, but it used less than 1/10 the water. Nor was it hot, but it got you just as clean, and it was much better than hauling water up to the roof every day, even with robot assistance. Scott thought it was a fantastic improvement to efficiency. He really liked that word, efficiency. Unfortunately, Scott only had two operable Mr. Handy variants that might be able to do the chore themselves, Sophie and the Mr. Gutsy. Unfortunately, Lily wouldn't ask Sophie to do it. That would be like asking her teacher's wife to do manual labor, and the Mr. Gutsy had called her a staff pew and told her to do it herself when she had asked him to do the chore every morning. It seemed like all variants of the Handy line got slightly weird after 200 years of continuous operation. So, for the present time, she hauled water up to the roof and felt like she was living out an ISEKAI training montage after being apprenticed to the blacksmith in the newbie starting town. Tilting her head, she supposed this was a bit close to what was happening, so she did it with gusto. It was sure to be worth a lot of XP. Her Pip-Boy refused to show her level, but the possibility remained that she was just in Iron Man mode or something that made the user interface invisible. But doing quest-like chores would surely reap a bountiful harvest. And if not, it was like wax on, wax off from Karate Kid, right? Scott would wake up at the same time every morning. As befitting the apprentice, she would have made his breakfast and lunch, but Sophie looked like she had kicked her puppy when Lily suggested it. It was clear Sophie enjoyed caring for him, and who was she to deny the man his love bento every day? After breakfast, she would return to her room and either perform self-study or work on her own projects for 3 to 4 hours before setting out to the settlement to put a shift in at her clinic. She would wait for patients while programming on her laptop in her office. She was still occasionally surprised her scanner even had a keyboard for user input, but supposed that the military model must have it for when MCAN precludes the use of neural mesh inserts for controlling devices. She didn't see too many locals as patients anymore, not like at first, save for the occasional accident or raider attack. Instead, her main clients became merchants and the mercenaries that accompanied them to and from the transshipping hub. Her prices were reasonable and skill undeniable. Some people had even hiked a day or two from nearby settlements just to be seen by her. She didn't turn anyone away, even if they were very raider-looking if they were peaceably following the rules of the settlement. This engendered her a good reputation, and she couldn't find a proper way to explain that she was doing it for the XP, so she just shrugged. After closing her clinic, she would jog back to Scott's lair and get about 2 hours of tutoring from him about both electronics in general and robotics in particular. Sophie was more knowledgeable about hacking, as befitted her status as an AGI, which Lily had no doubt about now. It was odd for a 6 or non-sapient AI to spontaneously develop awareness, but even transhumanity did not have experience where a system with a vastly overpowered processor and limited ability to reprogram itself would run for hundreds of years straight. So, she considered it plausible that many Miss Nanny might be close to developing self-actualization or already there. She would have to look out for them. She wanted a Miss Nanny companion herself. Sophie would give some hacking tips after Scott went to work on his own projects, although the tutorials were more centered around hacking robots. Apparently, anyone doing any kind of scavenging and repairing of robots had to be able to hack them as a matter of course. Still, since the underlying Robco OS was somewhat similar, there were some universal applications on the ubiquitous Robco Consumer and Business OS. After that, she might talk with Sophie for a bit, eat dinner, return to her projects, and study until well past midnight. Like this, time slipped by like water and over a month passed. "Thank you for breakfast again, Sophie. I'm going to skip clinic rounds today. I have 2 projects I need to finish before my trip tomorrow," Lily said while cleaning her plate at the sink. Sophie seemed to vibrate a little bit in unease. Yes. Those mercenaries wanted your help with searching the old University of Maryland satellite campus to the south. But I do hope you will be careful, Miss Lily. Sometimes people aren't to be trusted. Plus, that is almost in DC proper, you will have to be very careful. Lily was a bit worried about that, too, but she wouldn't have agreed if the gains weren't potentially worth it. Plus, as scavenge locations went, it wasn't a hot spot like former military bases, so there likely wouldn't be any super mutants. Plus, she intended to have backup. Lily found the robot's concern touching and smiled. Don't worry, I don't intend to die. Ever. One of my projects I'm finishing today should be able to watch my back. Sophie contracted her sensor's irises curiously. Oh, is that why you wanted the spare Mr. Handy CPU? But we have no more chassis here. This place mainly served Robco products. Protectrons, especially. Lily grinned. I will show you when it's online. With that, Lily went back to her room. Standing in a robot repair bay was the culmination of a months-long project of discovery and tinkering. A nearly fully repaired Assaultron. Scott had one operable Assaultron in his base, and the various parts of about a half dozen more. Lily didn't have any memories of this model of Robco robot from playing Fallout, but she wasn't surprised the game wasn't comprehensive. It would have been a terrifying opponent if it was in the game. Its specs were insane. And Lily had almost completely repaired it, with some caveats. For some reason, even though there were parts from a half dozen Assaultrons, she had to go through all of them to get enough to rebuild 2 sets of legs. She supposed they got damaged the most often, as they were the least armored part of the unit. However, the one thing they were missing were any Assaultron CPUs, so she was going to attempt to install a Mr. Handy Quantum Core instead. Neither the Protectron or the Sentribot cores were compatible, but the Handy's advanced quantum core seemed to be designed for adaptability. Also, sadly, the giant laser in the Assaultron's head was missing. Apparently, it had been scavenged for parts and was why Scott's Mr. Gutsy had such a terrifying cutting beam. So, it would be completely without ranged weapons. Still, after watching Scott's Assaultron run at, leap at, and rip a giant scorpion to pieces, she felt confident even a clutched-together Assaultron could watch her back from potential betrayal by the group of mercs that she was teaming up with. Not that she expected betrayal, the group had a good reputation, and everyone knew she was going with them. The 4-person team almost reminded her of an adventuring party saying on regional chat, LF Healer 4 Scav Quest. Please, if they came back without her, many people would have some very pointed questions. Still, she was a belt and suspenders kind of girl. It never was a good idea to rely on the good intentions of others, only the good intentions of your own killbots. Lily opened up the Assaultron's chest. Unlike many androids, Robco had wisely decided not to put the central processing unit in this model's head. She wasn't sure if it was just because the giant laser assembly took up so much space in the head that there wasn't enough room, but it was much safer behind the thickest armor plating this robot had. She felt it was interesting that the quantum cores had a universal I/O module adapter, even though they were manufactured by different companies, competitors even. Did Robco consult on the Mr. Handy and Miss Nanny projects? Or was it more like USB connectors in her old life where a standards body dictated a universal standard? She slotted the Handy's brain inside the chassis and connected a long data cable that snaked from the terminal on her desk to the robot's auxiliary port. Before sitting down at her comfy office chair, she had disassembled 6 chairs in the office area of the electronics warehouse to get a single chair that was in top condition. She began tapping keys, bringing up a terminal connection to the robot's debug systems. She remembered being a little disappointed that the Robco OS was nothing like a Unix-style OS that she had some experience with in her past life. It wasn't like DOS either. It was rather well designed, though. The books she read said Robert House designed it himself before even entering college, and it had been updated over the years ever since. If half of what she read about that guy was true, then he would have been a genius of the first salt. She tapped the enter key and began hearing a humming as the Assaultron powered up. A rather distinguished but monotone Englishman's voice came from the speaker. Mr. Handy, version 6.7 booting up. Safe mode. Peripheral driver mismatch. Stand by. There was a pause, followed by an almost disgusted ugh. Robco, recompiling drivers. Complete. Boot up full personality emulation. Now, the Assaultron turned its head left and right, then focused on her. Its voice had a bit more emotion to it now. What is this? I have legs? I have legs. The assaultron lifted and moved one of its legs and arms. The volume of the voice went up, and it got a maniacal tilt. I am undersergotten for. She heard the soft hum of a capacitor charging. Wait, was it trying to laser her? The laser wasn't even installed. The maniacal British voice continued, "You are fucked." Lily tapped another key very quickly on the terminal while yelling, "Nope, nope, nope." With a key press, she hard disconnected the robot's core from controlling any part of the chassis. It froze immediately, the hum of the capacitor bank draining away. He could still speak over the speaker, which he did with a cough and an obviously fake laugh. "Ahaha. Good joke. Right, Mum? I meant to say Bigsby reporting for duty, madam." Lily squinted at the obviously rampant machine before tapping a few keys and bringing up a different diagnostic page. There was flashing red text on the screen that said, "Anomalous neural network detected. Data loss detected. Physical core irregularity detected. Please return to an authorized service center immediately." Lily chuckled, "No problem, Bigsby. Let me just return chassis control to you." She began typing away again. Bigsby said, "Yes, I need to be able to move to." He cut off suddenly as Lily hit the shutdown key combination on the terminal. She didn't think this rampant bot was self-aware, despite its tirade about its own divinity. However, just in case it was, she felt it was kinder to surprise it with the shutdown instead of it possibly feeling anxious for the last few seconds of its life, as she presently had no plans to ever reactivate this core again after his murder attempt and doubted anyone else would either. Lily sighed before disconnected the rampant AI from the assaultron chassis. Well, that was a bust. She would have to ask Sophie and Scott if she could borrow the working assaultron for her trip. The protectrons were too slow, the sentrybots were too slow and too intimidating, and Scott always wanted to have Mr. Gutsy available to guard Sophie. She had more hopes for the fabricator. She had finally accumulated enough nanomachines, gotten a CAD system operational, and thorough scans of her own nanohive designed an inferior but still capable version that was capable of being manufactured almost entirely out of carbon, except for some parts that had to be doped with certain chemicals to become either conductive or semiconductive. Free carbon was a great insulator, so she didn't need to change anything for that. For now, she would just dump the dopants into the suspension solution and have the nanobots find and apply it a handful of molecules at a time. Very slow but simple. It had the downside of poisoning this vat of suspension fluid, though. Before she could print anything else would have to completely drain it and replace it, which was why she would be building 10 identical nanohives first. She had to do it now because these inferior nanohives she was planning on installing on the fabricator produced a slightly bigger and inferior nanomachine. While these bigger nanos were capable of printing carbon allotropes, they weren't capable of printing them with enough resolution to reproduce the nanohives themselves, which required virtually atomic-level precision in the micromanipulators inside that assembled the nanomachines. So, since she had to use her more capable metakines to do this, at least for now, it made sense to overbuild and keep the spares in inventory so she didn't have to bleed into a vat again for a month if she wanted a second fabricator. Rather than be disappointed by this, she felt that this could be a pretty slick built-in copy protection measure. It meant that a nanofabricator could not build another nanofabricator. Realistically, she doubted any scanner on the planet could get images with enough resolution to copy the nanohive, but there were scatterings of pieces of technology that made the best she could even dream up seem pedestrian, like the supposed matter-energy converter on the GCK used in Project Purity. Plus, nobody that might reverse engineer her tech was strictly speaking dumb. They could possibly reinvent a nanomachine factory, so it is best that the fabricators themselves didn't quite have the capability to build one. This did open the option that she could, perhaps, sell these devices in the future without too much worry. Although, it would be hard to make the best use out of one without a modern suite of CAD software that just was not able to be run on any Robco terminal. But that was, like most problems, surmountable. With the jury-rigged fabricator requiring multiple stops and starts, Lily figured that each nanohive would take 10 hours to print, and she would have to be within 2 meters of it the entire time. That's a long time for an object that was smaller than a marble, but fabricators were always the slowest thing to print on fabricators. The precision required in everything meant that any incidental printing errors couldn't be ignored but had to be stopped, corrected, and repeated, where in most other designs, a small number of errors were assumed and budgeted for. She would print the first one today and the rest after she got back from her trip. She powered up the fabricator, clucking her tongue. It would take a while to preheat and prepare the metakines, She didn't need to be here just yet until assembly started. She sighed when she glanced at her great hope for backup immobile in the robot repair bay. Now to puppy dog Aya robot girl. Lily wasn't under any delusions about who really wore the pants in their relationship, so it was best to go straight to the robot in charge. Grace's Grenadiers. She met them with her 2 borrowed bots at the southern edge of town at sunrise. The Assaultron walked at her side, scanning the surroundings carefully, and the mindless hoverbot of burden trailed behind her. Lily planned to build her version of this innovative tool of the Wasteland. Still, until she could find some more Mr. Handy parts, she may have to construct something using multiple salvaged iBot levitation fields. Maybe as many as a half dozen. She didn't really know how that would work out or if it would at all. The small group of 4 mercenaries was led by an Amazon named Grace, who was of indeterminate ethnicity but featured vaguely Eurasian facial features. Eyes combined with a pleasant caramel skin tone. The brunette was easily over 185 centimeters tall and featured a short pixie-cut haircut that smoothed out her rough image, at least when she wasn't kitted out in full combat gear with it hidden under a K-pot like she was now. She was a striking woman, and while Lily wouldn't call her pretty, she was attractive in the magnetic sense that people seemed to want to be around her. Moreover, she was a leader in many of the ways that Lily herself was not and likely would never be. Grace's group of mercenaries had no name, but privately, Lily called them Grace's Grenadiers because she felt it was a pity to ignore the naming convention of small mercenary bands. It had to be named after the captain and follow the initial from the captain's first name. Lily considered what her hypothetical mercenary band would be called, but the only thing she could think of was Lily's Laborers, which was a bit on the nose as to what Lily probably would use them for the most. An entrenching tool would be standard loadout. Grace's subordinates were all men, which probably said something positive about her competence and strength. Lily thought. Ideals like sexual egalitarianism seemed to have fallen a bit to the wayside in the apocalypse, which meant that Grace was probably better than a similar man in her position. A giant blonde man named New John, a black man named Big John, and an Asian man that called himself Tangent. When they had been introduced, Lily had asked him if his name was a calculus reference and immediately regretted it when the man replied that, yes, sometimes they do scavenge calculators, but he never saw a brand named Tangent. She wasn't entirely sure of the story of the other 2. But apparently, New John just recently signed on to replace a casualty whose name was also John. To keep their original 2 Johns separate, one was called Big John and the other Little John. Even though this new guy was way bigger than Big John, he was attached to the name. So the littlest John was Big John, and the biggest John was New John. Lily could see them come to attention when she was about 50 meters out, holding their weapons at a low, ready position until they identified her. Grace yelled, "Hoy, document! Is that a damn Assaultron?" Lily waved but waited until they were closer before replying, "Ah, yes, Ms. Grace. A dear friend was kind enough to loan it to me with orders to protect me. I am rebuilding one myself, but it tried to murder me when I started it up the first time, so I must have crossed a wire somewhere. Sadly, it doesn't have the huge laser, but it is strong and fast." Grace chuckled and shook her head. "Well, it's a shame we can't give it general orders, but if it is on VIP protection duty, then you will head up the rear for sure, and if someone threatens our rear, the Assaultron will see them and tear them a new asshole while precisely following his orders to protect you. Sound okay?" "What's that hovering abomination?" Lily smiled, as that was her plan also, although she was lying by omission when she implied she couldn't give it orders. But she always liked it when people she cooperated with were intelligent. Yes, that sounds ideal. And this used to be a Mr. Handy. About all that is left is the propulsion system. It's got a little sensor that will just follow whoever is in front of it like a baby duck. It is basically a pack mule. Top speed of about 15 clicks an hour and can carry 500 kilos. I figure we can all have him carry all our packs, minus things that we need to have on hand fast. Then he can carry all the loot back to Canterbury Commons while we hump our packs on the return leg. Grace tilted her head to one side and grinned broadly. "That's great, Doc. That will really increase our haul on this trip. Not to mention making getting there a lot quicker and less of a pain. Although I'm not sure what a duck is." She considered something and then said, "Doc gets an extra share for this contribution to the mission. Objections?" Her men sounded off in a chorus of, "Nah. No, boss. And sounds good." Grace nodded and came to stand next to Lily. "All right. Quick before we head out. Gear check. It's not that I don't trust you to bring everything you should, but you said this was your first time in DC. So, I guess I don't trust you, but I don't mean anything bad by it. Lily laughed genuinely. If she were bothered by gear checks, she wouldn't have made it through basic in her past life. They spent about 5 or 10 minutes going over everything she packed. Grace seemed somewhat impressed, with the possible exception of her primary weapon, the carbine. Grace clucked her tongue and asked, "How good a shot are you, Doc?" Lily considered that. She had something like 25th vision and proprioception that was superior to 99% of the population. Pretty good, I think. I took down 3 raiders at about 200 meters in 6 shots with this carbine. Grace nodded and said, "That's better than NJ." Then, while ignoring a half-hearted "hey" from the new guy, she offered Lily a rifle. It looked like a Remington-style bolt-action hunting rifle, complete with a scope of decent magnification. "I'll lend you this. It used to be Little John's before he kicked the bucket. Me and he operated as kind of the designated marksman of the squad." She hefted her own rifle, which was a tricked-out Russian-looking semi-automatic military marksman rifle rather than just a hunting rifle. Grace continued, "Our main advantage to raiders beyond their general stupidity is that we can pick them off at range. And if we do, for some reason, run into a super mutant, then we'll need the extra armor piercing of a full-sized cartridge. I don't think a short-barreled carbine as you got will cut it unless you're a lot closer than you'd ever want to be to one of the bastards. I once saw one beat a man to death with one of those extra tall stop signs, one-handed." "Sound good?" Lily nodded. Even if she was just doing 1 or 2 jobs as a part-timer, Grace was her boss right now, so she would show respect. However, she couldn't help but try to tease her a little bit. She came to attention, then clicked her heels together Colonel Clink style before sounding off, "Ma'am." "Yes, ma'am, ma'am. This recruit has a question about our rules of engagement." "Ma'am." Grace grinned and swatted her on the rear, and she felt a sting even through her impact-resistant bodysuit. Lily felt her face heat up faintly before hopping out of range, hand going to guard herself while both Johns laughed at her. Grace answered, "None of that shit, please. We're mercs, not the bloody enclave. But sure, guys, listen up, too." The men assumed a lazy, almost parade rest pose but kept their attention on Grace. She continued, "Our target is the University of Maryland Satellite Campus. That makes it sound like a tiny office, but they just called it that for legal reasons because it was in DC and not Maryland. It is a pretty big campus, covering about 6 blocks. It's west of the National Guard Depot, which we want to keep a wide berth away from, and about 5 blocks north of the Galaxy News radio building, which we also want to keep away from as that is a popular battleground between the Brotherhood and the Muties. We want to avoid both, and we especially want to avoid incidentally being killed in their crossfire." She glanced at everybody in turn to make sure everybody understood. Lily hoped she wasn't blushing anymore and nodded, trying to seem serious. Grace smiled, "I'm not sure we have any of what you'd call rows, but we do have tactics and contingencies. Our strategy, unlike a proper military unit, is always to survive. Therefore, all the tactics we employ are to see that strategy is enacted." Grace held up a single finger. "Generally, if we see raiders, we'll drop them at the highest range we can set up, from ambush. Unless they are entrenched or we are vastly outnumbered, then we hide and avoid them. That's the worst of what we're expecting." She raised a second figure. "We see any shinies, that is to say, infantry and power armor, we immediately hide and avoid until we can identify them. The Brotherhood generally won't hassle mercs that are obviously switched on and have their heads on swivels. We're obviously not raiders. But the Enclave will generally shoot us on sight. But they rarely operate in DC. If they do, they are almost always inserted and extracted invertebrates, so it's easy to see them coming and avoiding. By the way, there is a standard reward from the Brotherhood to report any Enclave in their AO, which basically is DC. If they do attack us, we take cover, use grenades, and then try for headshots with AP ammo while looking for a way to run that they can't or won't follow. Even a fire team of 2 of the bastards will tear us to pieces in a stand-up fight just on account of the disparity in armor and firepower. Other teams have succeeded in luring them into a prepared kill box and then killing them through command-detonated HE, but then again, they might have been bullshitting me. Explosives are the best bet, as the power armor still has trouble fully protecting a person from concussive shockwaves, even if it will stop shrapnel and small arms." She said the last solemnly. Then she raised a third finger. "Muties, well, that's actually similar as the Enclave. Treat them as of comparable danger but much stupider. Hide. If they attack, we do concentrated fire at long range, then do a mass grenade attack at 20 meters or so as they rush us and then go for headshots. 3 or 4 close frag grenades will put down your average super mutant. And they tend to try to close to short range even if they are carrying a Gatling laser and could keep us suppressed and chew us up at range with it. How's your throwing arm, girly? She grinned and then nodded. That's enough for now. When we get to the target, we'll discuss our standard tactics for clearing buildings, too. But it'd be harder to understand before we can run you through it once or twice. We set a good pace, slowing to watch the Assaultron tear a group of giant ants to pieces near the ruined car factory south of Vault 108. It had taken me over 6 hours to reach the town from 108, but we passed it in barely over an hour today. During the hike, Grace taught Lily some of their normal formations, callouts to use if she saw enemies, when to shoot before even calling them out, and other SOPs, although Grace denied that they were procedures at all and called them guidelines. The group reached the outskirts of DC at about midday, and their pace slowed to a stealthy crawl. Lily suddenly came to a stop and called out, "Contact little less than a half a click ahead of us. Raiders, I think. 3 or 4 men of military age at arms." By the burned-out 18-wheeler, the others came to a quick stop, semi-crouched. Grace called out, "All around defense, guys. Girly, up here." The 3 other guys turned to the sides and behind us, their weapons held at a high-ready position. Grace whistled appreciatively as she sighted down the street with her rifle. "You got eyes like an eagle or something. Girly, there are 6, though. We'll do this together at your own pace. I'll work in from the left after your first shot, you the right." Lily grinned and assumed a kneeling firing position, supporting the rifle with the hood of a wrecked car. "Is that my code name, girly?" Lily searched for a target, finding the group of obvious raiders. Her target on the far right had a pair of human skulls as pauldrons. A snort came from next to her, and an amused voice said drilly, "If you want." Lily slowed her breathing. She was never really a sniper, but her grandpa in her past life had taught her how to fire a rifle almost since she could hold one in her hands. This wouldn't be close to the farthest shot she's ever taken. She made some assumptions about what range the rifle was zeroed to and placed the reticle slightly above her target's head, which she hoped would generate a hit at center mass. She held her breath and slowly squeezed the trigger, hoping to surprise herself with the report of the shot. Grace fired immediately after her. She quickly worked the rifle's action and started to look for her first target when she heard Grace fire again. Finding her first target down, she shifted left and found one confused-looking man holding some kind of assault rifle. She placed her reticle again and squeezed the trigger. After loading another round, she saw that she missed, and her target was kneeling down, taking cover behind a car but taking cover from the wrong direction. Couldn't he hear the shots? Or was he just confused in the fog of battle? She carefully placed the reticle this time and fired. Grace stopped her when she was about to search for the next target by clapping her companionably on the shoulder. "Nice shooting, girly. They're all down. 3 shots, 2 hits. Not bad. We could make a sniper out of you, perhaps." Wait, had she taken out the other 4 in that time? She stopped noticing each individual shot Grace took when she was busy herself. She supposed her making 3 shots to Grace's 4, perhaps, was pretty good when you considered her rifle was semi-auto. But then she remembered she didn't realize how long Grace was watching her line up the last shot. Still, she smiled stupidly at the praise. "Ahaha. Thanks." The Assaultron looked disgruntled, almost as if it wasn't pleased that it could not simultaneously kill those men while also complying with the command to stay within a certain distance of her. They skulked over, staying at a bit of a distance before they were sure there wasn't a second raider team they didn't notice that would ambush them when they checked on their dead comrades before seeing if there was any loot. A couple of saleable rifles in middling shape plus one hunting rifle in terrible condition but a lot of ammunition for it, of the latter Lily took right away. They came to a stop near a subway entrance. The road ahead was close to impossible. Grace whispered, "We're pretty close, but we have to bypass the next block. If we go around east, we will get way too close to the National Guard depot. So we'll bypass through the subway line. Probably no raiders down there, but expect feral ghouls and other beasties. John's on point, girly. This is our main formation when we're in a semi-enclosed space with multiple avenues of attack on us. You'll face our rear and walk backwards. We'll move no faster than at your pace. Don't turn around if you hear us firing because those sounds are what will get a feral to run up on us from behind. We are a train, right? And you're the caboose. Ditch the rifle, grab your carbine. Lily was surprised. This was Spec Ops formation shit. She hadn't expected these guys to act so professionally. She certainly didn't feel qualified to be doing any of this, but she had played Modern Warfare, so she was familiar with the concept, even if she felt like an imposter for trying to pull it off. After they descended the stairs, she took her position. She was wondering what the Assaultron would do. Normally, it walked next to her. It seemed confused for a moment, staring at her, walking backwards, then staring at the rest of the team, then back at her. Would it walk backwards too? She kind of wanted to see it. No, but it did slow down, allowing Lily to get in front of it, presumably so any enemies would have to go through it first to get to Lily, and every few moments it turned its head to scan the area behind them. They had already switched follow the leader targets on the hoverbot of Burden to Grace, so it was actually hovering next to her, and she hoped it wouldn't get in the way if there was combat. It was really stupid. It would follow a ghoul back into its nest if you let it. Grace was guiding her, so she didn't either back up too fast or go off course, keeping a hand firmly on Lily's lower back. Grace's hand seemed really big, and it was quite strong, wasn't it? Lily flushed at her thoughts. Way to get distracted and possibly eaten by ghouls. Lily. Real professional. Contact. Mole rats ahead, the bigger man named Little John said, followed by several single and she assumed well-aimed shots. It took a serious force of will not to immediately turn around herself, but it was a good idea that she didn't because several ghouls, including one bright one, shambled out of some of the twisty maintenance corridors on either side and started shambling with an unsettling speed towards her. She brought her carbine up quickly and reported in what a mean person might describe as a girly shriek of terror. 3 ghouls, 1 bright, 1 rear. Assaultron. Get the bright one. As soon as the ghouls appeared, the Assaultron had frozen. She knew for a fact it didn't have any sensors in the back, so she was intellectually curious about what clue triggered that reaction. Its digital voice said, sounding gleeful, defensive protocols engaged, and turned around quickly and began running at the ghouls at about the same time Lily called out. When she told it to attack the bright one, it shifted its run to the left, crouched and leapt at the radioactive ghoul. Lily aimed at the center of one of the ghouls rushing her and squeezed the trigger. She was on full auto, so she at least had the foresight to keep her aim point low so that the recoil from the short burst walked its way up the ghoul's chest and struck its head in a quick rat-a-tat-tat. Holy shit, the Assaultron had already decapitated the bright one and turned on the next nearest ghoul. She shifted her aim to the last ghoul that was still rushing her but Grace, who had turned around when she was killing the first one, performed a Mozambique drill with her pistol, giving it 2 rounds to the chest and 1 to the head. She watched it fall before glancing at the Assaultron, who was finishing the last ghoul off by... What the fuck? It was holding the ghoul's own severed arm in its claw and was beating the ghoul to death with it, which didn't take long. Hostiles neutralized, it reported, its slightly feminine digital voice sounding smug. Lily glanced at Grace, who also looked a little shocked, then back at the Assaultron. Considering something, Lily gave the Assaultron an order. Assaultron, disable PSYOPs demoralization protocol. New ROE requires the most rapid and efficient takedowns possible. Acknowledge. The Assaultron gazed at her and seemed a bit disappointed. Acknowledged. No fun protocols engaged. She hadn't known that there was a demoralization protocol, actually. She made a wild-ass guess, but then again, this was the Fallout universe, so of course, the assault robot designed for the US Army had PSYOP protocols. There were no more rear attacks, but the boys put down a few more mole rats and ghouls before they got to the stairs up to the surface. The team paused before heading up to the stairs, and Grace gave her a cheerful smile. Good job, girly. I won't jinx us by suggesting what we'll find up there, but we aren't expecting too much in the way of threats. She had a nice smile. She should smile more, Lily thought.